Get out already, they demanded, their voices cutting through the tense air of the house. Yeah, give us this house already, echoed the demand, leaving Kathy feeling like a stranger in her own home. I can't believe this is happening in my own house, Kathy thought, her heart heavy with disbelief. But if you really want this house, I'll give it to you. Just you wait and see, she resolved silently, steeling herself for what might come next. My name is Kathy Smith. I just turned 60 this year, she reminded herself, drawing on her inner strength. I got divorced when I was young. My ex-husband was a heavy drinker and he used to verbally and physically abuse me, Kathy reflected, her past pains still haunting her. When he started to raise his hand against our children, I served him with divorce papers, she recalled, the memories still vivid in her mind. After that, I single-handedly put our 2 children through college, Kathy continued, pride mingling with the pain of her past. Now, I continue to work in flower arrangements, a job I've always enjoyed, she stated, finding solace in her passion. Also, I've started online lessons a few years ago and have been enjoying the new interactions, Kathy added, a glimmer of excitement in her voice. My eldest son, Max, who has always lived at home, married a woman 2 years older than him, Kathy shared, her thoughts drifting to her family dynamics. I thought that they would move out, but they asked to live with me. Since there was no particular reason to refuse, I agreed to live together, the 3 of us, Kathy recounted, the weight of her decisions evident in her words. My eldest son's wife, Anna, was quiet and not good at housework. She started learning it from me, and I thought she was a good girl, Kathy reminisced, a tinge of disappointment coloring her memories. But now, her initial image is gone, and her true nature is fully exposed in front of me. She talks back and has a foul attitude, but in front of my son she acts like a quiet and good wife, Kathy lamented, the betrayal of trust weighing heavily on her heart. The house where she learned she only does laundry for her clothes. The rest is left undone, Kathy observed, the reality of her situation sinking in. This is supposed to be the house where I've lived for many years, but somehow I'm treated like an intruder, Kathy confessed, her voice filled with resignation. Yet I am somehow managing to live with these 2 who show no signs of leaving, Kathy acknowledged, her determination shining through the adversity. But little did I know that day would greatly change my life, Kathy reflected, a sense of foreboding creeping into her thoughts. That day, after finishing my online lesson and taking a break, the house was filled with Max's yelling, Kathy recalled, the tension rising with each memory. Hey old hag, we're out of shampoo, I can't wash my hair, she mimicked, the words stinging her ears even now. Despite being in the bathroom, his yelling reached all the way up to my room on the 2nd floor, Kathy remembered, the frustration evident in her tone. He is like this every day, so I'm used to being yelled at by him, Kathy sighed, resignation coloring her words. Not being very quick myself, I went to get the refill shampoo as quickly as I could, Kathy recounted, the routine of her days unfolding before her. Here, I'm sorry I didn't notice, she offered, her attempt at peace met with disdain. Too slow, it took too long after I called. Make sure to check time. I'll be careful next time, Max retorted, his words cutting deeper than any insult. Without saying anything, he snatched the refill shampoo from me, Kathy admitted, her hurt palpable in the memory. At that moment, I accidentally cut my palm a little deeper with the refill bag, Kathy confessed, the pain of her physical and emotional wounds intertwined. Complaining here would just add fuel to the fire, Kathy sighed, her resignation evident in her tone. Sighing, I took a bandage out of my first aid kit, Kathy continued, the routine of caring for herself a small comfort in the chaos. Then Anna called out to me, What, you got hurt? You're so clumsy, Kathy recounted, the sting of Anna's words still fresh in her mind. It's almost dinner time. Isn't the meal ready yet? I'm hungry, Anna demanded, her entitlement grating on Kathy's nerves. Oh, is it that time already? I'll start preparing right away, Kathy responded, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. Would you mind helping out, Anna? Kathy asked, her hope for assistance met with resistance. Ha, why do I have to cook too? I'm not helping, so hurry up and get it done, Anna retorted, her disdain evident in her tone. When she was about to go, Max got out of the shower, Kathy recalled, the tension between them escalating with each passing moment. He seemed to sense the tension between her and me and interjected, Kathy remembered, the fleeting hope of understanding dashed by his words. Anything happened? Don't tell me you were being nagged by the old hag, Max remarked, his indifference a sharp contrast to Kathy's pain. No, nothing like that. She just asked me to help her with dinner because she got hurt, Kathy explained, her attempts at reason falling on deaf ears. She started talking to him in a sugary voice, completely different from her previous attitude, Kathy noted, the facade of civility crumbling before her eyes. I recognized this routine and resigned myself to what was about to happen, Kathy admitted, the weight of her acceptance crushing her spirit. So she forced you to help. Hey hag, you know Anna can't cook, right? Max accused, his words like daggers aimed at Kathy's heart. Are you kidding me with this? I didn't force her, I just asked if she could help. When she declined, I was going to do it myself, Kathy protested, her voice shaking with frustration. As I was explaining myself, she quickly wrapped her arm around his and began to argue, Kathy recounted, the betrayal of her son's allegiance cutting her deeply. She told me she can't cook because she got hurt her hand. And the reason dinner was late was because she was sleeping, not working, Max defended, his loyalty to Anna blinding him to the truth. Enough. Whether you said it or not doesn't matter now. The fact that you tried to make Anna cook is true. It's your fault, hag, Max accused, his words a final blow to Kathy's hopes for reconciliation. With that, he stormed off to the living room, his back to me, Kathy remembered, the pain of rejection washing over her like a tidal wave. At that moment, she stuck out her tongue in satisfaction as if it was a victory, Kathy recalled, the bitterness of defeat staining her soul. And then followed him to the living room, Kathy concluded, her voice hollow with resignation. He always took her side and never showed any. I caught sight of Max and Anna sprawled on the couch, their casual demeanor interrupted by my presence. Anna, quick to compose herself, straightened up and smoothed her appearance, flashing a fake smile as she greeted our guests. Long time no see, Lily. You look more beautiful than ever and Jake is handsome as always. Please sit down, she said, motioning for them to take a seat. Anna then gracefully excused herself from the couch and made her way to the kitchen. Once Lily and Jake settled in and started chatting with Max, I quietly followed Anna into the kitchen. There, Anna was busy preparing coffee for everyone except me. As I reached down to grab some snacks from a lower shelf, Anna's demeanor shifted. She leveled a thinly veiled threat at me, accusing me of not informing her about our guests' arrival. I didn't hear anything about them coming over. Are you messing with me? I did let you know, Anna. You just chose to ignore it, making excuses again. You'd better watch it with that, she warned, her hand poised threateningly. Just as I prepared to shield myself, Lily walked in. Concerned, she offered to help and inquired about the situation. Anna, caught off guard by Lily's presence, quickly retracted her hand and feigned innocence. For the first time, I was taken aback. As Anna was about to hit me, my daughter Lily moved closer to me, positioning herself protectively between us. I recounted, relief flooding over me at Lily's intervention. What on earth was that about? Surely, Anna, you were trying to hit my mother, were you? Lily questioned, her tone incredulous. Of course not. I would never do such a thing. I saw something about to fall from the shelf, and I thought it was dangerous, so I was just trying to help. Wasn't I, mother-in-law? Anna quickly interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. Yes, that's right. You saved me, Anna. Thank you. I'll take care of the rest of the preparations, so please, just relax, I replied, playing along with Anna's charade to diffuse the tension. With that, Anna returned to the living room, her smile unwavering, but her eyes betraying no warmth. Despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling of fear that gripped me. Lily, sensing my distress, offered words of comfort, assuring me of her protection while she was there. And in that moment, her words were a balm to my frayed nerves, soothing the tension from my body. I breathed a sigh of relief when Lily entered the kitchen, breaking the tense atmosphere. If she hadn't, I was certain Anna would have followed through on her threat. Thank you. I feel better now, I managed, mustering a weak smile. Lily, perceptive as ever, saw through my facade. I know you, Mom. You will tell me that if I ask, but remember this, if you ever need help, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be there for you anytime. Lily reassured me, her sincerity touching my heart. I nodded in agreement, grateful for her unwavering support. After that, the rest of the day passed peacefully. As night fell, Lily and Jake decided to head home after dinner. Anna offered to help prepare the meal, but Lily insisted she relax, perhaps having witnessed her earlier behavior. With Lily's assistance, dinner preparations went smoothly, and our conversation flowed freely in the kitchen. It was a pleasant change of pace, and for the first time in a while, I genuinely enjoyed myself. Once the meal was ready and we all sat down to eat, my eldest son praised Lily's cooking. "This is delicious, Lily. Your cooking is the best," he complimented. Despite my protests, he continued, comparing her cooking favorably to mine. Anna simply smiled and nodded, but Lily and Jake exchanged serious glances. The room fell silent until Lily addressed Max. "I think you're misunderstanding something, bro. Mom did all the seasoning," she explained. Max's expression darkened, feeling deceived. Anna's smile wavered, signaling trouble brewing. Just as tension threatened to escalate, Jake intervened, diffusing the situation with understanding. "I can totally understand. My mother-in-law's seasoning is similar to Lily's, so it can't be helped," he chimed in, easing the atmosphere. As we finished eating, Jake kept the conversation light with amusing anecdotes, restoring cheerfulness to the room. After Lily and Jake left and the cleanup was done, however, a dreadful incident unfolded. Max's demeanor shifted drastically as he hurled insults at me, reminiscent of my past with my ex-husband. Unlike his demeanor earlier, there was no restraint in his words. "Hey, you old hag, you really put me to shame today," he snapped. But I refused to be intimidated. "There's no such thing as shame, you know," I replied calmly, refusing to let his insults shake me. I learned that she had invited Lily and Jake over to get back at us. I overheard her and Lily talking. Anna chimed in, accusingly. "Anna, Lily, and I didn't talk about such a thing," I protested, but my words fell on deaf ears. "Shut up, you old hag." Anna wouldn't lie. "Enough with your acting," he snapped, kicking me suddenly. I tumbled to the floor, paralyzed with pain. But his assault didn't stop there. He approached me, kicking me repeatedly as I gasped for breath amid the agony. All the while, Anna watched with a giddy smile. "You're always useless, and it makes me sick," he yelled, his words barely registering in my hazy consciousness. Finally, he seemed satisfied and stopped kicking. Seeing my battered state, Anna burst into laughter, her cruelty piercing through me like a knife. Remembering the terrifying days of domestic violence with my ex-husband, tears flowed uncontrollably out of fear. But instead of compassion, their laughter only intensified. "What are you crying for? I don't want to see old ladies crying, you know, right, Anna?" he mocked, his words cutting deeper with each syllable. With a heavy heart, I realized I needed to leave this place as soon as possible, but my body wouldn't obey. "Pack your stuff quickly, old hag. Leave this house today," he demanded, his tone unforgiving. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This house, filled with memories I had gathered over the years, was under my name. I had never even considered leaving. "Understand? Pack your things within an hour and get out. This is our house from today. Move quickly unless you want to be kicked again," he threatened, his words leaving me no choice but to submit. In agony, I started packing, tears streaming down my face out of frustration, fear for the future, and anger towards them. It was the first time. I harbored a deep-seated resentment towards them and vowed to fight back. Once I finished packing, they wasted no time in kicking me out, barely exchanging a word. As I stood on the sidewalk, pondering my next move, the thought of my daughter Lily surfaced in my mind. Hailing the cab, I grasped at straws and headed towards Lily's home. Upon arriving at her house, I noticed the lights were on, and I rang the doorbell. Through the intercom, I heard her voice. When she realized it was me, she quickly opened the door, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. It was only natural. Moments ago, her mother was unharmed, but now I bore bruises, visibly carrying the weight of my ordeal. Lily immediately called for Jake to help carry my baggage, supporting my body as they led me into the house. She assisted me in removing my jacket and gently guided me to the couch. Despite my less than ideal condition, she meticulously assessed the extent of my injuries. Jake fetched a blanket to ensure I stayed warm, his actions reflecting their unwavering care and concern. After evaluating my injuries, which included multiple fractures and a significant bruise on my head, Lily suggested a visit to the hospital for further examination. Initially hesitant, I declined, not wanting to inconvenience them further. However, they insisted, and upon arrival at the hospital, the examination revealed the severity of my injuries. Though fortunately, there were no issues with my head, I was advised to stay for observation. 3 days later, I was discharged and returned to Lily and Jake's home. I'm really sorry, both of you. I don't know how to apologize for causing you so much trouble, I express, overwhelmed with gratitude for their support. Don't worry about it. We're just glad it wasn't life-threatening, Lily reassured me. After we're settled in, can we ask what happened? Reluctant at first, I knew withholding the truth wouldn't suffice, especially considering the severity of my injuries. So, I recounted everything from the verbal abuse to the terrible treatment from Max and Anna since we began living together. Lily listened in silence, her husband also lending his ear from a distance. After I finished my story, I mustered the courage to make a request to the two of them. I hate to ask, but could I stay here for just a few days? I'll find an apartment that I can move into right away, so it's just until then, I begged tearfully. To my surprise, the response was unexpected. Mother-in-law, please don't make that face. While you were in the hospital, Anna and I discussed this. We thought we should live together. What do you think? Lily proposed, catching me off guard. Their suggestion of living together was something I never imagined. Overwhelmed with joy, tears streamed down my face. Thank you, I said repeatedly, expressing my gratitude. They comforted me until I stopped crying. Afterward, we decided to live together, the three of us. Lily and Jake made a proposal to give Max and Anna a taste of their own medicine for all the terrible things they had done. But is it okay to do something like that to your own brother? I questioned. Lily's response was resolute. I can't forgive those two. I believe they must not be forgiven. Seeing her determination, I agreed to the proposal, entrusting them to handle everything. Around the time the month changed, I received a call from Max. Hey, we had no idea there was still a mortgage on the house, and now we got a summons to court. What's going on? He demanded, his tone accusatory. I never said there was no mortgage. It's your house now. You should be the one to pay, I replied calmly. Max's response was heated. You gotta be kidding. We can't afford to pay that much. It's your house, you built it, so you should pay till the end, he argued. Refusing to accept responsibility, I stood my ground. It was you who kicked me out, so it's not my business, I retorted. Max's threat hung in the air as he abruptly ended the call. Trembling with fear, I realized the gravity of the situation, but believing Lily and Jake were on my side, I managed to calm myself. When I later informed Lily and Jake about the call, they seemed unsurprised. Mom, just ignore his calls from now on, Lily advised. Following her guidance, I obediently complied. Since then, I've been receiving calls almost every day from Max and Anna, but I steadfastly obey her advice. I continue to ignore the relentless calls. One day, they showed up at Lily's place. I was in the middle of an online lesson at the time and wasn't privy to the initial conversation. After my lesson, as I headed to the living room, I heard familiar voices. Peeking quietly, I saw Max and Anna pleading with Lily and Jake. Please just lend us a little bit of money, they begged. Lily responded sternly, how have you been handling your finances up until now? Weren't you contributing even a bit to your household? Well, we were paying our cell phone bills and insurance, but we never gave any money to my mother, Max admitted. Lily and Jake exchanged stunned looks and let out a sigh. So you're saying that Mom was covering all expenses, including utilities and food, and despite that, you treated her like a maid, verbally abused her, and eventually assaulted her and drove her out of her own house. We don't have a single cent to lend to people like you guys, Lily said firmly. What do you mean by verbal abuse and assault? Max hesitated, prompting Jake to step in. I agree with Lily. When we found mother-in-law, she was in a terrible state. She even had to be hospitalized. That's clearly a crime, Jake asserted. At this point, Max grew defensive and attempted to lunge at Lily. I was about to intervene, but Jake swiftly got in between them. Effortlessly restraining Max, Jake maintained control while Lily called the police. Shortly after, the police arrived and took Max and Anna away. Once they were gone, I rushed over to Lily and held her close. I'm glad you're okay. Really glad you didn't get hurt. Jake, thank you for protecting Lily. I expressed my gratitude. They both simply smiled in response, treating me kindly to put me at ease. Later, the evidence gathered by a detective and the lawyer Lily and Jake hired ensured we would receive a substantial amount of punitive damages from Max and Anna. It was then revealed that they had each been having affairs and were in a messy situation. Now, not only did they have financial issues, but they also had marital problems to face. Free from my abusive son and his wife, Once I regained my freedom, I started to heal, venturing outside again with a newfound sense of peace. Despite this, I still received occasional contact from Max, a clear violation of the court-ordered no-contact rule between us. Each time this happened, I promptly contacted my lawyer, who handled it with strict adherence to the law. One day, while at the supermarket, I bumped into our old next-door neighbor who shared some interesting news. Apparently, Max and Anna were constantly embroiled in arguments about money and infidelity. Anna's true nature had finally come to light, acting as the catalyst for their impending divorce. As a result, they had decided to put their house up for sale. Meanwhile, my private investigator unearthed some revealing findings about Max's downward spiral. His involvement in police matters, lawsuits, and now his divorce had become the talk of his office. His inflated ego led to him quitting his job immediately, and he was dumped by his affair partner. Now, he works part-time and is homeless, spending his nights in parks and abandoned buildings. As for Anna, she had been staying with the man she was having an affair with, but she too was recently dumped. Now, she's seeking work in live-in jobs, attempting to rebuild her life from scratch. Her once beloved hobbies such as nail art and other fashionable activities have been abandoned, and she's now living a humble existence. Meanwhile, I decided to buy back our old house, which had been put up for sale. After some renovations, I now live there with my daughter Lily and her husband Jack. Lily, with her qualifications in aromatherapy and massage, suggested opening a small shop on the spare land we had. We've been managing well, offering physical lessons in the shop, selling items, and running a reservation-based aromatherapy massage service. Returning to our own home brings happiness every day. I am grateful to Lily and Jack, who took care of all the complex issues like private investigators and lawyers, which I found hard to handle. Their support has enabled us to achieve our current lifestyle. I have a wonderful relationship with Lily and Jack, and recently, I received the delightful news that Lily is pregnant. I can't wait to hold my grandchild in my arms. Looking ahead, my life will only become more joyful, and I consider myself very fortunate. I cannot thank them enough. I am truly grateful.
I knew it was going to be another one of those nights the moment Amber walked through the door. Her nose was crinkled, lips pursed into a tight frown, as if she'd caught a whiff of something foul. I tried to ignore the judgmental glances she shot my way as I bustled around the kitchen, putting the final touches on dinner. "Glenda, darling, you've outdone yourself as always," Harlan said, kissing me on the cheek. At least someone appreciated my efforts. "Mom, the pot roast smells amazing," Ethan chimed in, giving me a warm hug. Amber simply scowled and muttered under her breath, "If you say so." We settled around the dining table, and an awkward silence fell over us as we began eating. I could feel Amber's eyes boring into me, sizing up each bite with disdain. The pot roast, a family recipe using the cheapest cut of meat, was worlds away from the fancy fare she'd become accustomed to at overpriced Manhattan eateries. "So, how was everyone's day?" I asked, desperate to break the tension. Ethan launched into a story about the hilariously inept new intern at his office, but Amber didn't so much as crack a smile. She simply pushed the food around her plate, every so often shooting me a look that could curdle milk. My efforts to make pleasant conversation died on the vine as Amber's displeasure became more and more palpable. By the time we finished eating, the atmosphere had grown so frosty you could hang meat in it. "Well, that was just dreadful," Amber said, making no attempt to mask her contempt as she rose from the table. "I'm going to call Francesca and see if she grabbed a table at that new tapas place." She stormed off to make her call, leaving me to clean up yet another mess, literally and figuratively. As I scraped the remains of my labor of love into the trash, I couldn't help but overhear her conversation floating in from the living room. "Yes, it was just pedestrian slop as usual from Glenda," she sneered in a mocking tone. "I told Ethan he needs to get me cooking lessons for my birthday because I simply cannot survive on such unsophisticated, mediocre fare." Her callous words twisted like a knife in my heart. But in that moment, the sting of her insult ignited something within me, a simmering defiance, a refusal to simply take her abuse lying down any longer. Amber's condescending ways had gone too far for too long. If it was fancy food she wanted, I vowed, fancy food she would get. One way or another, I would expose her snobbish charade for all to see. I could feel Amber's smug gaze burning into the back of my head as I tapped my foot impatiently in the long line at Boulangerie Sublime. This trendy little bakery was all the rage, their decadent desserts coating the lips of every Upper East Side socialite. And of course, it was Amber's new obsession du jour. I simply must have the Grand Marnier soufflé for my book club meeting, she had demanded that morning while scanning reviews on her iPad. The ladies will surely be impressed. Getting my hands on one of those coveted soufflés wasn't going to be easy, though. The bakery's limited quantities sparked a daily stampede, with customers queuing up before dawn like they were vying for Coachella tickets. But Amber's whims were not to be denied. "Don't forget, you need to get there right when they open at 8 a.m., she instructed with an air of smug superiority. "They always sell out before noon." As if I didn't already have enough to do getting ready for her pretentious book club, squeezing in this errand was going to be a major pain. But I knew better than to argue with Her Royal Highness. After jostling my way through the throngs of line waiters for over an hour, I was finally ushered inside the bakery. My hopes were immediately dashed as the snooty clerk shook his head in disdain. "We're all out of the soufflés, I'm afraid," he announced with an uppity French lilt. "You'll have to come back first thing tomorrow." My face flushed with embarrassment as the other customers openly mocked my futile errand. "Seriously, lady? Did you expect to waltz in at 9:15 and snag one?" A nasally woman clucked from behind me. Dejected, I trudged back home, dreading Amber's reaction to my failure. Sure enough, when I walked through the door, she was waiting in the kitchen with her signature sneer. "Well?" she demanded imperiously. "Where is my soufflé?" "But they were all out by the time I got there," I stammered, bracing for her wrath. "Are you kidding me?" she exploded, her face contorting into a mask of rage. "You had one simple task. How could you possibly mess that up?" She ranted and raged for what felt like an eternity, her insults growing more vicious and demeaning by the minute. All the while, I just stood there and took it, burning with humiliation and resentment. "I swear, Glenda, sometimes your incompetence is staggering," she spat. "You're useless, an utter failure." Those hateful words detonated something deep inside me, igniting a fury I could no longer contain. In that volatile moment, my desire to appease this vile woman evaporated like smoke. She wanted to see just how much of an utter failure I could be. Message received, Amber. Game on. Over the next few days, Amber's scathing treatment of me continued unabated behind closed doors, but the moment Ethan or Harlan were around, her demeanor underwent a striking transformation. "Glenda, darling, I simply can't get enough of your cooking." She would gush with saccharine sweetness while patting my hand. "Everything you make is just sublime." The compliments dripped like hot wax from her lying lips. I could hardly believe this was the same woman who had berated me as a hopeless failure just hours earlier. Ethan, ever the naive one, just beamed with pride at his wife's supposed appreciation for my culinary talents. "That's my Glenda," he would chuckle, pulling me in for an affectionate hug. "A regular Julia Child, isn't she?" If only he knew the truth about the venom Amber spewed behind his back. How she ridiculed and denigrated everything and everyone she perceived as beneath her cultivated airs. No one was spared her snide condemnation, not even her own family. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen whipping up a batch of my famous oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, a treasured family recipe using basic, inexpensive ingredients. Amber came sweeping in, wrinkling her nose at the homey aromas. "Good Lord, Glenda, you're not serving those pedestrian monstrosities at the charity luncheon, are you?" She sneered with undisguised revulsion. I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation and outrage. But before I could respond, Ethan strolled in, and her scowl instantly morphed into a brilliant smile. Those cookies smell delightful, mother-in-law," she chirped in a sickly sweet tone. "Just like from a gourmet bakery. The ladies will go wild for them, I'm sure." Ethan just chuckled obliviously as he snatched a cookie off the tray, cramming it into his mouth. Yup, these are the greatest," he mumbled through a mouthful of crumbs. "You've really outdone yourself this time, Mom." It was all I could do to keep from hurling the tray across the room. This two-faced, malicious behavior from Amber was becoming more than I could bear. My own son was so blind to her true, vicious nature that my heart ached for him. Later, After Ethan had left for work, I confronted Amber about her abhorrent double act. "Why must you insult me and put down my cooking 1 minute, then turn around and sweetly praise it the next?" I demanded, my voice trembling with pent-up emotion. She simply shrugged and rolled her eyes at my wounded indignation. "Please, Glenda, don't be so sensitive," she scoffed coldly. "I'm just looking out for Ethan's best interests. He doesn't need his oafish mother serving up bargain basement swill and embarrassing him in front of his colleagues and friends." The cruel arrogance in her tone crystallized my determination right then and there. Enough was enough. It was time for this two-faced witch to get her comeuppance once and for all, and I would be the one to serve it up to her on a silver platter. With Amber's callous words still ringing in my ears, I started hatching a plan to finally expose her two-faced behavior. The next Sunday, I was hosting the whole family for a big dinner, the perfect opportunity to set my trap. As I busied myself in the kitchen prepping the meal, I made sure to utilize only the simplest, most basic ingredients, the kinds of bargain basement fare Amber openly mocked. Pork shoulder from the supermarket budget bin. Potatoes, carrots, and onions straight from the local produce stand. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious, just humble, home-cooked goodness. When Amber arrived with Ethan and Harlan in tow, her eyes immediately narrowed with disdain at the rustic aromas wafting from the kitchen. "What is that smell?" She wrinkled her nose. "It better not be another one of your tragic downscale meals, Glenda." "Actually, it's a very special dish I've been working on," I replied with a sly grin, "but you'll just have to wait and see." Amber's signature scowl told me all I needed to know. The bait had been taken. As we gathered around the table to eat, I made sure to pile Amber's plate high with the humble fixings, much to her obvious disgust. She poked and prodded the food with her fork, grimacing. "Well, are you going to at least try it?" I asked innocently. Amber flashed a sour glance at Ethan and Harlan, both of whom were already wolfing down their portions with obvious enjoyment. Reluctantly, she raised a forkful of the pot roast to her pursed lips. "This looks dreadfully rustic," she proclaimed with obvious disdain. "But I suppose I can choke it down, for Ethan's sake." I held my breath as she took her first tentative bite, bracing for the inevitable torrent of disparaging comments. But it never came. Instead, her eyes went wide with surprise as she slowly chewed and swallowed. "Actually, this isn't half bad," she admitted grudgingly after a pause. "The flavors are quite robust, I'd say." Buoyed by that small victory, Amber soon began shoveling the food down with almost rabid gusto, grunting with approval between ravenous bites. Ethan and Harlan looked on in pleased bemusement, no doubt shocked by her uncharacteristic zeal for my rustic home cooking. "Glenda, this may be the best dish you've ever prepared," she effused, mopping up the last of the gravy with a slice of bread. "You've clearly outdone yourself this time. Why, I'd wager this swill could give even those pompous bistros in the city a run for their money." The naked contempt in her tone as she insulted my humble offerings sent a hot flash of anger through my body. But I managed to keep my expression impassive, disguising my roiling fury behind a thin smile. "Why, thank you, Amber," I cooed. "I'm so pleased you enjoyed it." Oh, but she would soon eat those smug, condescending words. That's when the true meal would begin. After clearing the dinner plates, I made sure to heap lavish praise on Amber for her apparent newfound appreciation of my home cooking. "I'm so delighted you enjoyed that meal," I gushed, laying it on thick. "Your refined palate clearly recognized the superior quality of those ingredients." Amber just nodded haughtily, lapping up the flattery like a parched cat. "Well, of course I could taste the difference," she preened. "You simply must share where you sourced that exceptional pork and produce." This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Time to set the next phase of my plan into motion. "Actually, those ingredients were nothing special," I replied with a sly grin. "Just picked up at the regular grocery store down the street. But I'm so pleased my preparation skills elevated them to your discerning standards." Amber's brow furrowed with confusion as she processed this admission. But before she could respond, I pressed on with my ruse. "In fact, I've been inspired to take my cooking to even loftier heights," I declared with faux enthusiasm. For our next family dinner, I'm going to prepare a true gourmet feast utilizing only the finest, most premium ingredients money can buy. That piqued Amber's interest. her eyes glittering with avarice. "Do go on," she urged, leaning forward expectantly. "Well, I'm going to start by sourcing some primo beef tenderloin from that elite butcher in the city," I began, relishing every fabricated detail. "The one that supplies all the iconic steakhouses and commands a 3-month waiting list just to get a prime cut." Amber was practically salivating at this point, hanging on my every word. Ethan and Harlan just exchanged bemused glances, clearly not understanding what had gotten into me. Then for the produce, I'm thinking of flying in some heirloom varieties from this acclaimed farm in Tuscany that Michelin chefs are raving about, I went on breathlessly. Of course, I'll need to track down some creme de la creme dairy products too, butter from an artisanal creamery, that sort of thing. "Glenda, this all sounds marvelous," Amber gushed, fanning herself. "A true Epicurean adventure. You simply must let me assist in sourcing these world-class delicacies." I shook my head, reveling in her transparent eagerness to indulge her snobbish Epicurean fantasies. "Oh no, my dear, I insist on handling every detail myself as a surprise for my treasured family." Little did she know, the real surprise was yet to come. As the evening drew to a close and our guests prepared to depart, Amber pulled me aside with ill-disguised glee twinkling in her eyes. "I can't wait to savor your culinary masterpiece at the next gathering, Glenda," she purred. "It's about time your talents are put towards more elevated ends." With a wink, she turned and sashayed out, utterly clueless of the role she would soon be playing in my delicious come-uppance. This was gonna be good. The big night had finally arrived. Amber swept into the dining room, her nose already wrinkling disdainfully at the simple table setting. "Really, Glenda? This rustic decor?" she tutted, running a manicured finger along the plain linen tablecloth. "For the lavish spread you've been boasting about, I expected something a bit more elegant." I suppressed a smirk as I bustled out carrying a silver serving dish. "Don't worry, dear, the true elegance is what's underneath this cover." I slowly lifted the lid with a flourish, revealing a thick, juicy tenderloin roast glistening with a rich demi-glace. Amber's eyes grew wide as saucers, greed and gluttony etched across her features. "Is that—" she gasped, practically panting. "Why, yes, the much-hyped beef from that world-renowned butcher in Manhattan," I proclaimed with feigned nonchalance. "The one with the 3-month waiting list, as I mentioned." Amber's eyes fluttered with rapture as she leaned over to inhale the heady aroma. "Glenda, it's magnificent. I can practically taste the decadence already." She fairly swayed on the spot like a debutante recovering from the vapors, as I set the dish down in front of her with a ceremonious flourish. The other platters I paraded out in succession only heightened her delirious anticipation. "And these," I announced with a wave of my hand, "petite potatoes cultivated from an elite farm in the French countryside that supplies 3-star Michelin chefs. Hand-delivered yesterday by a master gardener after a months-long germination process." That was complete hogwash, of course. I'd picked those russets up from the supermarket bargain bin just like always. But Amber hungrily gobbled up every word, nodding feverishly all the while. Finally, I presented the pièce de résistance, an exquisite cheesecake drizzled with an emerald mint glaze. Behold New York's most elite dairy purveyor's smoothest triple cream chèvre, accented with sun-ripened strawberries flown in fresh this morning from a boutique farm in Provence, I breathlessly described with a completely straight face. In reality, it was just a standard supermarket cheesecake doctored up with some mint extract and strawberry jam from my pantry. But Amber was utterly transfixed, borderline comatose with avarice as she fixated on every imagined delicacy before her. "Glenda, I'm speechless," she finally gasped, clutching a trembling hand to her hollow bosom. "This opulent feast it's too much. You've truly outdone yourself." Ethan and Harlan just gawked in stunned silence, clearly wondering what had gotten into me with all this bombastic overselling. Little did they know it was all a grand setup for Amber's looming humiliation. No sooner had we dug into the very first course than Amber began to moan and groan with rapturous delight, showering me with breathless compliments between every decadent bite. "This beef is a transgressive experience, Glenda, a spiritual awakening in every velvety morsel." It went on and on like that through each successive dish. By dessert, she was practically swooning, scraping up every last crumb and licking her plate clean. best meal I've ever had, anywhere, she raved, practically in a fugue state. You've ruined me for all other food. I just smiled thinly and thanked her as Ethan and Harlan exchanged bewildered shrugs. But inside I was grinning wide in gleeful anticipation. The trap had been perfectly sprung. Now for the final delicious sting. As Amber sat back with a contented sigh, gently patting her stuffed belly, I decided to strike while the iron was hot. So, I take it you enjoyed this little culinary adventure? I asked innocently, trying not to let my grin show too much smug satisfaction. Enjoyed it? That doesn't even begin to describe it. Amber gushed, her eyes glazed over in a dreamy trance. This was a full-body experience that transcended mere sustenance. Every bite was a finely crafted masterwork to be savored and contemplated. Ethan and Harlan shot each other confused looks, clearly baffled by her overblown outpouring of praise. Bless their hearts, they had no clue what a charade this entire evening had been. Well, I'm overjoyed my efforts met with your discerning approval, I replied with a sly smile. Though I must admit, I simply couldn't have pulled off such an Epicurean tour de force without your invaluable guidance. Amber blinked slowly, her brow furrowing. My guidance? What do you mean? Ooh, this was going to be delicious. Why, your constant insistence on only the finest, most elite ingredients, of course, I exclaimed with mock innocence. You've trained my palate to reject anything less than the utmost in culinary perfection. I could see the dawning look of baffled realization creeping across Amber's face as I drove the knife deeper. Take this beef tenderloin, for instance, I went on breezily. You made it quite clear that only the most luxurious, world-class cut would pass muster with your refined tastes. So, of course, I had to source it from that Impossible Book boutique butcher you're always raving about. Amber's mouth worked silently as she processed my words, panic flashing in her eyes, but I kept piling it on ruthlessly. And the produce? Well, you've hammered home time and again how pedestrian American crops simply wouldn't do for a true gourmand like yourself. So naturally, I had to go the extra mile obtaining these French and Italian delicacies flown in from your preferred purveyors overseas. By this point, Amber's face had drained of all color, giving her a sickly pallor. She flicked a terrified glance over at Ethan and Harlan, seeing the first cracks in her facade forming. That's not... You've got it all wrong, she sputtered desperately. But I was just getting warmed up, ready to put the killing stroke on this whole rotten charade of hers once and for all. Oh, and this cheesecake, I crowed, barely able to contain my delight. You certainly gave me an education on why no ordinary cream cheese would suffice. Only the organic, artisanal triple cream from that snobby little Madison Avenue fromagerie could possibly meet your lofty standards. Amber opened and closed her mouth wordlessly, utterly at a loss as the entire web of lies she'd spun unraveled around her. Ethan and Harlan's dumbstruck expressions revealed the veil had finally been lifted on the disdainful elitist monster they'd married into the family. I took a deep breath, steadying myself to deliver the coup de grace. Which is why, I announced in a tone dripping with sugary faux sweetness, I wanted to sincerely thank you, Amber, for inspiring me to put all my skills and effort into this sumptuous high society repast. I gestured grandly at the plates of half-eaten food surrounding us, each course prepared from the plainest, most basic supermarket provisions money could buy. A gourmet masterpiece, you called it, fit for the most refined of culinary queens, when really it was nothing more than my typical bargain basement home cooking dressed up in fancy airs. The penny finally dropped for Amber as her face contorted with impotent rage and humiliation. Her menu of deceit had finally been laid bare, and the main dish was an extra-large serving of cold, harsh truth. Game, set, and match, courtesy of this fed-up mother-in-law. The aftermath of my grand unmasking played out like a shipwreck in extreme slow motion. Amber's face contorted through a gamut of emotions, shock, anger, shame, desperation, as the truth of her deception sank in. You conniving old witch, she finally sputtered, eyes bulging with outrage. How dare you try to humiliate me like this in front of my husband? Ethan sat in stunned silence, his expression unrateable as his wife's cringeworthy facade crumbled before his eyes. Harlan, on the other hand, looked like he was trying not to bust a gut laughing. Amber, honey, I think the only one doing any humiliating here is you, he chuckled, shooting me an approving wink. This was just a long overdue reality check. Reality? You want to talk reality? Amber raged, rounding on my poor clueless son. Wake up and smell the green juice, Ethan. Your quaint little mama and her down-market home ec skills don't belong in this century, let alone our social sphere. As those hateful words sliced through the air, something shifted in Ethan's face. The rose-tinted scales of denial seemed to fall away as he finally got an unfiltered look at the poisonous snake he'd married. That's enough, he said quietly, raising a hand to silence Amber's tirade. I've heard more than enough out of you tonight. Amber froze, her mouth hanging open in gobsmacked shock. She clearly wasn't accustomed to Ethan going against her arrogant diktats. But darling, you can't be serious, she sputtered incredulously. You're really going to take the word of this spiteful old troll over your own wife? Ethan's jaw tightened as he rose to his feet, anger flashing in his eyes. Maybe if my wife had been an honest, loyal partner, instead of a lying, materialistic snob, I wouldn't have to make that choice. The air fairly crackled with tension as Amber's shrill scoffing filled the room. Well, I can certainly see where your true priorities lie, Ethan Morris, with the help in their downscale ways, apparently. She shot me one last murderous glare before snatching up her purse and storming towards the door. Don't worry, I know when I'm not wanted, she hurled over her shoulder. Have fun playing house with Mummykins and her pathetic home cooking. I deserve better than this poverty-class charade. The slamming of the front door behind her echoed through the stunned silence that followed. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, head bowed, as the gravity of this marital rupture washed over him. At last he raised his gaze to meet mine, a lifetime of pent-up hurt and frustration shining in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You were right all along about Amber. I was just too blind and dazzled to see the truth. In that moment I felt the icy knot of resentment that had taken root in my heart all those years began to thaw and dissolve. My son had been lost, true, but now, finally, he had found his way home. As I pulled Ethan into a fierce, forgiving embrace, I knew our family had been irrevocably broken, but not beyond repair. We would pick up the pieces, slowly healing the rifts that Amber's greed and cruelty had torn open through our unconditional love and stubborn decency. And this time there would be no snobby pretenses or polite fictions masking the truth, just the honest bonds of this mother and son duo firmly intact, sharing good food, good company, and stubborn determination to always keep it real, no matter how ugly. The crisp autumn air greeted me as I stepped out of my car, the familiar scent of freshly fallen leaves filling my lungs. Glancing up at the quaint two-story house where I had spent countless childhood summers, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Little did I know that this unexpected return to my hometown would unravel a web of deceit that threatened to tear my family apart. Lenore? The gruff voice of my grandfather, Gregor, broke the silence. What in God's name are you doing here? I mustered a weak smile, trying to mask the turmoil bubbling within me. It's a long story, Grandpa. His brow furrowed as he studied me intently, those piercing blue eyes seemingly peering into my soul. Well, you'd better come inside and start talking. As we settled into the living room, the memories of simpler times flooded back, but my mind quickly snapped back to the present, the weight of my recent misfortunes pressing heavily upon me. My voice faltered, the words catching in my throat. I lost everything, Grandpa. Gregor's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. What do you mean? You lost everything? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the onslaught of questions. My business partner in New York, he betrayed me, swindled me out every last penny I had. Gregor's eyes narrowed, his skepticism palpable. And how exactly did this happen? As the details spilled forth, each revelation more damning than the last, I could see the disbelief etched across my grandfather's face. The way he looked at me, it was as if he didn't recognize the person sitting before him. So you're telling me that this snake conned you out of your life savings? Gregor shook his head, his voice laced with disappointment. I thought I raised you smarter than that, girl. His words stung like a slap to the face. But I couldn't blame him. The weight of my naivety crushed me, the shame burning hot in my cheeks. I know, Grandpa. I know. My voice trembled, the tears threatening to spill over, but I swear, I had no idea he was capable of such deceit. Gregor's gaze softened ever so slightly, but the skepticism remained. Well, you're here now. We'll figure this mess out, one way or another. As he rose from his chair, a heavy silence hung in the air, unspoken questions lingering like ghosts. Little did we know, this was merely the beginning of a much darker truth that would shake the very foundations of our family. The weight of Gregor's words hung heavy in the air as we sat in silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoing through the room like a metronome counting down the seconds until the next bombshell dropped. Little did I know, the revelations that followed would shatter what little remained of my trust in those closest to me. Gregor cleared his throat, his expression grave. "Lenore, there's something I need to tell you." I steeled myself, bracing for yet another harsh truth to come crashing down upon me. "You know about the inheritance your grandma left you, right?" he began, his voice low and somber. I nodded, my brow furrowing in confusion. "Of course, you've always taken care of managing it for me." Gregor's jaw clenched, and he averted his gaze as if struggling to find the right words. "That's just it, kid. I haven't been managing it, not for years now." My heart skipped a beat, a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. "What are you saying, Grandpa?" He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping with the weight of whatever burden he carried. "Your Uncle Hal, he's been handling the finances, and it seems he's been helping himself to more than his fair share." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me as the weight of his words sank in. Uncle Hal, the man I had looked up to as a child, the one who had always seemed so generous and caring, had been stealing from me all along. How is that possible?" I stammered, my hands trembling. "Why would he do such a thing?" Gregor shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. "I don't know, kid. I trusted him, too. Gave him full control over the accounts years ago when my health started failing." The sense of betrayal cut deep, like a knife twisting in my gut. Not only had I been swindled by a business partner, but now it seemed my own flesh and blood had been deceiving me as well. "Do you have any idea how much is missing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gregor's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Enough to make my blood boil, that's for damn sure." In that moment, a fire ignited within me, a burning desire for justice and retribution. Uncle Hal had not only stolen from me, but he had violated the sacred trust of family, and for that he would pay dearly. As Gregor laid out the evidence he had uncovered, the suspicious transactions, the lavish purchases, the blatant disregard for our financial well-being, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I would not rest until every last penny was accounted for, and Uncle Hal was held responsible for his despicable actions. With a steely determination etched across my face, I met Gregor's gaze. "Don't worry, Grandpa. We're going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it takes." The sense of betrayal burned like acid, eating away at my insides, as Mom and I pored over the financial records Gregor had uncovered. With each damning transaction, each suspicious investment, the full extent of Uncle Hal's deceit became glaringly apparent. "I can't believe this," Mom muttered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. How could he do this to his own family? I shook my head, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Greed, Mom, pure and simple. The paper trail spoke volumes, painting a vivid picture of Uncle Hal's lavish lifestyle. The luxury cars, the extravagant vacations, the ostentatious home renovations, all funded by the very inheritance meant to secure our family's future. "Look at these investment portfolios," I said, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "He's been gambling our money away on high-risk ventures, chasing get-rich-quick schemes." Mom's eyes widened as she scanned the pages, her expression darkening with each line she read. "This is reckless, irresponsible, unforgivable." A heavy silence fell between us, the weight of Uncle Hal's betrayal hanging thick in the air. We had trusted him implicitly, never suspecting that the very man tasked with safeguarding our legacy was systematically dismantling it from the inside. "We have to stop him," I said, my voice low and resolute. "We have to make him pay for what he's done." Mom's eyes met mine, a steely determination reflecting back at me. "Absolutely, but we need ironclad proof, something he can't weasel his way out of." As we strategized late into the night, the path forward became clear. We would have to set a trap, lure Uncle Hal into a false sense of security, and catch him in the act. It was a risky gambit, but one we were willing to take to ensure justice was served. In the days that followed, we meticulously gathered evidence, documenting every transaction, every financial maneuver Uncle Hal had made. The stack of incriminating paperwork grew thicker with each passing hour, a damning testament to the depths of his greed and deceit. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. We arranged a family dinner under the guise of clearing the air, inviting Uncle Hal under the pretense of reconciliation. Little did he know, we had laid the perfect trap, one that would expose his misdeeds and leave him with nowhere to hide. As he strode through the door, a smarmy grin plastered across his face, I felt a surge of determination coursing through my veins. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to finally confront the man who had betrayed us all. "Lenore, darling," Uncle Hal exclaimed, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "It's so good to see you." I forced a smile, steeling myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. "Uncle Hal, we have a lot to discuss." The tension in the air was palpable as we gathered around the table, Uncle Hal's false bravado doing little to mask the unease that radiated from him. It was as if he could sense the trap closing in, but his arrogance blinded him to the truth. "So, what's this all about?" he asked, flashing that smarmy grin that had once charmed so many. "I thought we were here for a nice family dinner." I exchanged a glance with Mom, our resolve steeled by the mountain of evidence we had amassed. This was the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to finally confront the man who had betrayed us all. "We know what you've been doing, Hal," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "The embezzlement, the shady investments, the lavish spending, it all stops now." Uncle Hal's face contorted into a mask of feigned confusion, his eyes darting between us like a cornered animal seeking an escape. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lenore. This is preposterous." Mom slid a thick file across the table, the damning paperwork spilling out like a twisted confetti of deceit. "We have proof, Hal. Bank statements, investment portfolios, receipts, all documenting your every move." For a brief moment, Uncle Hal's composure faltered, his mask of indignation slipping ever so slightly. But he quickly regained his footing, his lips curling into a sneer of contempt. "So what? You think you can just accuse me and expect me to roll over?" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This is my family's money, and I'll do with it as I see fit." The sheer audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow, the depth of his selfishness and entitlement laying bare for all to see. In that moment, any lingering shred of familial loyalty evaporated, replaced by a burning desire for justice. "How dare you?" I fired back, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "That money was never yours to take. It was meant to secure our future, our legacy, and you've been systematically dismantling it for your own personal gain." Uncle Hal's face twisted into a sneer of contempt, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure hatred. "You ungrateful little brat," he snarled. "After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me?" The air seemed to crackle with tension as our voices escalated, the once civil dinner devolving into a bitter showdown of wills. Accusations flew back and forth, each one more scathing than the last, until finally, Uncle Hal's mask of control shattered completely. "You want to know the truth?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I did it all for you, for this pathetic excuse of a family. Everything I've done was to keep us afloat, to maintain the lifestyle we deserve." The sheer audacity of his words left me reeling, the depths of his delusion and self-justification laying bare for all to see. In that moment, I knew there was no reasoning with him, no shred of remorse or redemption to be found. As the din of our confrontation echoed through the room, I caught sight of Gregor's ashen face, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and sorrow. It was then that I realized the true cost of Uncle Hal's betrayal. The rift it had torn through our once close-knit family, the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. But even in the midst of that turmoil, a single thought burned bright within me. Uncle Hal would pay for his actions, no matter what it took. The wheels of justice had been set in motion, and there would be no turning back. The fallout from our explosive confrontation with Uncle Hal was swift and severe. In the days that followed, word of his betrayal spread like wildfire through our small town, igniting a firestorm of gossip and judgment. Some rallied behind us, offering words of support and condemning Uncle Hal's actions. Others, however, remained steadfastly loyal to him, clinging to the facade of success he had so carefully cultivated over the years. How could he do this to his own family? Aunt Peggy lamented, her eyes brimming with tears. After everything we've been through together. Uncle Hal's younger brother, Todd, was less forgiving. That snake always had a talent for charming his way into people's wallets, he spat, his voice laced with contempt. I just never thought he'd stoop so low as to steal from his own blood. As the divisions within our family deepened, the strain became palpable. Thanksgiving dinners were boycotted, Christmas gatherings canceled, the once unbreakable bonds of kinship fraying under the weight of Uncle Hal's deceit. Through it all, I remained resolute, steeling myself against the onslaught of whispers and sideways glances that seemed to follow me wherever I went. The sympathizers, the enablers, the holier-than-thou busybodies who couldn't resist sticking their noses where they didn't belong. Their judgments rolled off me like water off a duck's back. My focus was singular, ensuring Uncle Hal faced the consequences of his actions, no matter what it took. Mom, bless her, was my rock through it all. Don't let them get to you, honey, she'd say, wrapping her arm around me in a reassuring embrace. We're doing the right thing, and that's all that matters. Still, the strain of the whole ordeal began to take its toll. Sleepless nights plagued me, my mind racing with scenarios, contingency plans, and worst-case outcomes. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, my nerves frayed to their breaking point. Then, one crisp autumn morning, everything changed. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the silence like a knife, jolting me from a fitful slumber. Gregor's gruff voice crackled through the line, his tone laced with urgency. Lenore, you need to get over here. Now. Without a moment's hesitation, I threw on whatever clothes were within reach and raced over to Gregor's house, my heart pounding in my chest. What I found there would forever alter the course of our quest for justice. Gregor ushered me inside, his face ashen and drawn. It's Hal, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's gone too far this time. In the living room, a scene of utter chaos greeted me. Furniture lay overturned, picture frames shattered, and in the midst of it all, a chilling message scrawled across the wall in what appeared to be red paint. You'll regret this, you ungrateful brats. A chill ran down my spine as I took in the words, their menacing implications hanging heavy in the air. Uncle Hal had crossed a line, and in that moment, I knew there would be no turning back. As I surveyed the wreckage, a steely resolve settled over me. Uncle Hal had made his move, and now it was our turn to strike back. The gloves were off, and the stakes had just been raised. This was no longer about recouping financial losses. It was about protecting our family, our dignity, and our very lives. Uncle Hal had declared war, and we would answer his challenge with everything we had. The chilling message scrawled across Gregor's wall was a stark reminder that Uncle Hal's depravity knew no bounds. But rather than cowering in fear, it only fueled my determination to bring him to justice, no matter the cost. As Mom and I huddled with Gregor, formulating our next move, a plan began to take shape, a bold, audacious gambit that would require precision timing and nerves of steel. We need to catch him in the act, I said, my voice low and resolute. Get him to incriminate himself in a way that can't be denied or twisted. Gregor nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in contemplation. A sting operation of sorts? Exactly, I replied, the pieces falling into place. We'll lure him in with the promise of a deal, make him think he's getting away with it all. But this time, we'll be the ones holding the cards. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation, dotting every I and crossing every T to ensure our plan was airtight. We enlisted the help of a trusted private investigator, arranging for state-of-the-art recording equipment to be installed in Gregor's living room, the very scene of Uncle Hal's unhinged outburst. Finally, the stage was set. A carefully worded message was sent to Uncle Hal, inviting him over to discuss a resolution to our familial conflict. The bait was laid, and all we could do was wait with bated breath. The appointed hour arrived, and with it, the sound of Uncle Hal's car pulling into the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest as Mom and I took our positions, tucked away in the adjacent study with the investigator, monitoring the live audio feed. Uncle Hal sauntered in, his usual cocky swagger on full display. All right, I'm here, he announced, casting a disdainful glance around the room. What's this all about? Gregor cleared his throat, his voice trembling ever so slightly. Hal, we've been talking, and we think it's time to put all this ugliness behind us. A derisive snort escaped Uncle Hal's lips. Is that so? And what, pray tell, did you have in mind? A settlement, Gregor replied, his words measured and deliberate. A clean slate, if you will. You return what you've taken, and we can move forward as a family again. A tense silence hung in the air as Uncle Hal mulled over the offer, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Finally, he let out a low chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. You really think it's that simple, old man? He sneered. That I'd just hand over everything I've worked for, all because you and your ungrateful brats threw a little temper tantrum? The venom in his words was palpable, his true colors shining through like a neon sign. This was the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to catch him in his own web of lies and deceit. We have proof, Hal, Gregor pressed, his voice steady and unwavering. Reams of evidence documenting your every move. It's over. Uncle Hal's face contorted into a mask of rage, his composure shattering like a fragile glass. You stupid old fool, he snarled. Did you really think you could outsmart me? I've been running circles around you for years. The confession poured forth in a torrent of vitriol, each word more damning than the last. Uncle Hal laid bare the intricate schemes he had woven, the lengths he had gone to fleece our family of our hard-earned legacy. And through it all, the recording captured every sordid detail, preserving his unraveling for posterity. As his tirade finally wound down, Uncle Hal's chest heaved with exertion, his eyes wild and unfocused. It was then that the realization seemed to dawn on him. The trap had been sprung, and he was well and truly caught. A sickly pallor crept across his features as Gregor fixed him with a steely glare. It's all on tape, Hal, he said, his voice laced with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. Every last word. In that moment, the full weight of Uncle Hal's downfall seemed to crash down upon him, the consequences of his greed and hubris finally catching up to him in spectacular fashion. And as Mom and I emerged from our hiding place, united in our resolve, one thing became abundantly clear. The tides had turned, and justice was finally within our grasp. The incriminating evidence we had gathered, coupled with Uncle Hal's own damning confession, was a devastating blow. But the battle was far from over. We knew that in order to truly achieve justice, we would need to confront him head-on, lay bare his misdeeds for the entire family to witness. And so, with steely determination, we prepared for the ultimate showdown. Gregor, ever the master strategist, devised a plan to lure Uncle Hal to a seemingly innocuous family dinner under the guise of clearing the air. Little did the serpent know we had something far more explosive in store. The appointed evening arrived, and as the rest of our extended family filtered into Gregor's home, the air was thick with tension. Hushed whispers and sideways glances betrayed the undercurrent of suspicion and mistrust that had taken root in the wake of Uncle Hal's transgressions. And then, like a darkened cloud rolling in, he made his entrance, all bravado and false smiles, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Ah, there's my loving family, he crowed, spreading his arms wide in a mockery of affection. I'm so glad we could all come together and put this ugliness behind us. I fought back the urge to spit in his face, my hands clenching into tight fists at my sides. The audacity of the man to waltz in as if he hadn't just been caught red-handed in his own web of lies and deceit. But I held my tongue, exchanging a knowing glance with Mom and Gregor. The time for talk was over. This was the moment we had been waiting for, the chance to expose Uncle Hal's true colors for all to see. As the meal progressed, the tension in the room grew thicker by the minute. Uncle Hal regaled us with story after story, each one more grandiose than the last, his false charm oozing from every pore. It was sickening to watch, this master manipulator at work, and yet the knowledge that his downfall was imminent made it all the more bearable. Finally, as the plates were cleared and the last drops of wine drained from our glasses, Gregor rose to his feet, his gaze fixed squarely on Uncle Hal. Well, now that we're all here, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. Uncle Hal's bravado faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of unease passing across his features. But he quickly recovered, plastering on that smarmy grin that had once charmed so many. Of course, he replied, waving a dismissive hand. Let's get it all out in the open, shall we? Little did he know, we were about to blow his world wide open. With a single nod, Gregor signaled to me, and I reached into my bag, retrieving the damning audio recording that would seal Uncle Hal's fate. As the opening bars of his own voice filled the room, spewing forth a vile litany of confessions and admissions of guilt, a hush fell over the gathered family. Shock and disbelief etched itself onto their faces as the full extent of Uncle Hal's betrayal unfolded before them. And through it all, Uncle Hal remained frozen in place, his complexion growing paler with every passing second as the noose of justice tightened around his neck. When the final damning words had played out, a deafening silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of Uncle Hal's ragged breathing. "Well, Hal?" Gregor's voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "Anything to add?" For once in his miserable life, Uncle Hal seemed well and truly speechless, his mask of control shattered beyond repair. As the weight of his crimes bore down upon him, his eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an ally, a sympathetic face, but found none. The family that had once rallied behind him had finally seen the truth, and there was no turning back. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of vindication wash over me. The man who had so callously betrayed our trust, our loyalty, our very livelihood, was finally being held accountable. And as the shock and horror gave way to a chorus of condemnation from our gathered loved ones, one thing became abundantly clear. Uncle Hal's reign of deceit and manipulation had finally come to an end. Justice, at long last, had been served. In the aftermath of Uncle Hal's spectacular downfall, a strange calm settled over our family. The storm of anger and betrayal had finally passed, leaving in its wake a sense of resolution and a renewed determination to pick up the pieces and move forward. Of course, the legal ramifications were swift and severe. Uncle Hal found himself facing a litany of charges, from embezzlement and fraud to grand larceny. His once charmed life came crashing down around him, his ill-gotten gains seized and his reputation in tatters. As for the financial restitution, Uncle Hal was forced to liquidate every asset he had acquired through his deceitful schemes. Every last penny was meticulously accounted for and returned to its rightful place, the family's legacy, the inheritance he had so callously plundered. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure. While the relief of having our hard-earned legacy restored was palpable, the pain of Uncle Hal's betrayal still cut deep. The trust that had once bound our family together had been shattered, and the road to healing would be a long and arduous one. But heal we did, slowly but surely. Gregor, ever the wise patriarch, took the first steps by relinquishing control of the family's finances to a team of professional advisors and trustees. No longer would the temptation of unchecked power lead someone down the path of greed and corruption. "I failed you all," he admitted, his voice heavy with remorse. "I let my pride blind me to the truth, and for that I am deeply sorry." It was a humbling moment, one that resonated deeply with all of us who had been caught in Uncle Hal's web of deception. We had all been guilty of blind trust, of believing that blood ties were thicker than the lure of easy money. But from that collective pain came a hard-won lesson, a renewed commitment to vigilance, to accountability, and to the unwavering pursuit of truth, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable. As for me, the entire ordeal had opened my eyes to a harsh reality, that even those closest to us are capable of unimaginable acts of selfishness and cruelty. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one that ultimately steeled my resolve and sharpened my instincts. In the months that followed, I found myself drawn to the world of financial literacy and advocacy. I saw firsthand how a lack of education and transparency could pave the way for exploitation, and I was determined to do my part in shedding light on these issues. It started small, with workshops and seminars aimed at empowering individuals to take control of their financial futures. But as word spread of my own harrowing experience, the demand for my expertise grew. Before long, I found myself speaking at conferences and events across the country, sharing my story and imparting the hard-won lessons I had learned. It was a calling I had never expected, but one that filled me with a sense of purpose and redemption. And through it all, my family remained by my side, a united front forged in the crucible of Uncle Hal's betrayal. We had emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. As I looked back on the tumultuous journey that had brought us to this point, one thing became abundantly clear. While the path to justice had been fraught with pain and heartbreak, the ultimate victory was worth every struggle. Uncle Hal's downfall had not only restored our financial legacy, but had ignited a fire within each of us. A burning desire to live with integrity, to hold ourselves and those around us accountable, and to never again allow the insidious forces of greed and deception to take root. It was a hard-won triumph, but one that would echo through the generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of truth, perseverance, and the unbreakable bonds of family. I stared at Chris's still body, numb with shock and grief. The heart monitor's flat line echoed through the room, a cruel reminder that the man I loved was gone forever. Just then, the door burst open. Emily stormed in, her face contorted with rage. "You think you can pretend to care for me now after everything you've done?" Her accusation felt like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to respond, but what could I say? Our relationship had been strained for years, ever since I married her father. "I'm not your real mother, and I never will be," I stated, my voice trembling. It was a harsh truth, but one we both knew deep down. Emily sneered. "Don't act so innocent. You manipulated my dad from the start, worming your way into our lives. And for what? His money?" "That's not true," I protested, though a part of me wondered if she was right. Had I been blinded by Chris's wealth and status? No, I loved him, didn't I? "Save it," Emily spat. "I'm going to make sure you don't get a single cent. You're nothing without him." Her words cut deep, reigniting every insecurity and doubt I'd harbored over the years. As she stormed out, I sank into the chair beside Chris's bed, burying my face in my hands as sobs racked my body. How had things gone so wrong? When Chris and I first met, I'd been drawn to his kindness, his warmth. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. And despite my initial reservations about dating a man with a child, I'd fallen hopelessly in love. But Emily had never accepted me. From the moment I stepped into her life, she viewed me as a threat, an intruder. No matter how hard I tried to connect with her, she shut me out, her teenage angst morphing into a cold, calculated cruelty as she grew older. And Chris, bless his soul, had been too soft on her, too eager to keep the peace. He'd enabled her behavior, siding with her against me time and again until I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. Now, with Chris gone, I was truly alone, facing the wrath of a vengeful stepdaughter who seemed determined to destroy me. As the weight of Emily's hatred bore down, I knew one thing for certain: the battle for Chris's legacy, for my very future, had only just begun. I met Chris at a company party, back when I was working in HR at a tech firm. He walked into the room, and it was like the air shifted. I couldn't take my eyes off him. His warm smile, the confident way he carried himself. When our eyes met, something sparked between us. After the party, I couldn't stop thinking about him. A few weeks later, we ran into each other at a cafe, and he asked me out. I said yes, despite the little voice in my head warning me about his complicated situation. On our first date, he was open about his past, his failed marriage, his struggle to connect with his daughter Emily after the divorce. I admired his honesty, his vulnerability. Over dinner, I found myself drawn to his values, his desire to be a better father and partner. The more time we spent together, the deeper I fell. Chris treated me with a tenderness and respect I'd rarely experienced in my years as a single woman. He made me feel cherished, special. But I couldn't ignore the shadow that loomed over our relationship, Emily. At 16, she was a sullen, resentful teenager who clearly blamed me for her parents' divorce. She refused to give me a chance, shooting me icy glares whenever I was around. Chris tried his best to make it work, to blend our lives together. We took family trips, had game nights, went out for nice dinners. But the tension was always there, simmering beneath the surface like a dark undercurrent. "She's just going through a phase," Chris would say, wrapping his arms around me. "She'll come around eventually." I wanted to believe him, but Emily's coldness only seemed to deepen with time. Our family dinners were a war zone, with her firing off snide comments and rolling her eyes whenever I spoke. Chris would shoot her warning looks, but he never truly disciplined her, too afraid of pushing her away. As the months passed, I started to see Emily's true colors. She was manipulative, playing Chris and I off against each other, to get what she wanted. One week she'd give me the silent treatment, ignoring my existence. The next she'd be all smiles and charm, regaling Chris with stories of her academic achievements or volunteer work. "She's just trying to impress you," I told Chris after one particularly nauseating display. "Can't you see she's manipulating you?" But he refused to hear it, too blinded by his love for her, too desperate to have that father-daughter bond he'd always craved. Time and again he'd make excuses for her behavior, enabling it, as if his indulgence could somehow make up for the sins of the past. Looking back now, I realize I should have run, saved myself from the heartache to come. But I was in too deep, and my love for Chris wouldn't let me abandon hope. The dangerous, foolish hope that one day, somehow, Emily would accept me. Little did I know that her hatred for me ran deeper than I could have ever imagined, and that the worst was still to come. After Chris and I got married, I hoped things might improve with Emily. I was her stepmother now, an official part of the family. Surely that had to count for something. But Emily remained as distant and hostile as ever. On our honeymoon, she called Chris multiple times, always with some dramatic crisis that needed his immediate attention. When we finally returned home, exhausted, she greeted us with a look of pure disdain. "Enjoy your little vacation?" she sneered as I walked through the door. I forced a smile. "It was lovely, thanks for asking." She rolled her eyes. "Whatever, at least now you got what you wanted, a rich husband to take care of you." The words stung, but I didn't rise to the bait. After setting my bags down, I turned to leave, only to hear her mutter under her breath, "Gold digger." I whipped back around, fury rising in my chest. "You know, Emily, I'm trying my best here, but you're making it impossible." "Alicia, Emily, that's enough." Chris's voice boomed, startling us both. He stepped between us, a pained look on his face. "Can't you two get along, just this once? For me?" Emily immediately softened, her expression turning contrite. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'll try harder, I promise." She shot me a venomous glare, then brushed past us towards her room. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Chris. "I can't keep doing this. The way she treats me." "Shh." He pulled me close, stroking my hair. "Give it time. She's been through so much with the divorce. But she's a good kid deep down. She'll come around." I wanted to believe him, but months passed with no improvement. Emily remained sullen and withdrawn, alternating between ignoring me completely and making snide remarks whenever we crossed paths. Chris insisted on family dinners, saying it would help us bond. But they only seemed to make things worse. One night, over a meal of rubbery chicken and limp broccoli, Emily announced, "I got an A on my English paper. The professor said it was the best in the class." "That's wonderful, honey," Chris beamed. "I knew you could do it." He turned to me, his eyes shining with paternal pride. "Alicia, did you hear that? Isn't that great?" I forced a smile. "Yes, that's really impressive, Emily. Well done." She narrowed her eyes at me, nostrils flaring, as if my praise was deeply offensive. "It's no big deal, just something talented people can do." The barb hit its mark. I felt myself shrink under her withering gaze. Chris, ever the peacemaker, quickly changed the subject. But I could barely focus, Emily's words echoing in my mind like cruel taunts. After dinner, as I cleared the plates, Emily brushed past me with a sneer. "Thanks for doing your job, Cinderella." I sucked in a sharp breath, fighting back tears. Why was she so determined to hurt me at every turn? What had I done to deserve such venom from her? As the weeks rolled by, the isolation and anxiety took their toll. Some nights, I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with doubts. Was I the problem? Was I not trying hard enough? If only I could get through to Emily, make her see that I loved her father more than anything. But she seemed dead set on making my life a living hell. The young woman I'd hoped to form a bond with was little more than a vindictive stranger determined to shut me out. And the harder I tried to break through, the more viciously she lashed out, until one fateful day when all my worst fears would finally come to light. As Emily progressed through high school and college, her disdain for me only intensified. She became a master manipulator, using her charm and intelligence to wrap Chris around her finger whenever she wanted something. "Daddy, can I please get the new iPhone?" She'd coo, batting her long lashes. "All my friends have it, and I really need it for school projects." Chris would hesitate, looking at me uncertainly, But then Emily would pout those full lips, and he'd instantly cave. "Oh, all right, anything for my little girl." I'd try to reason with him later. "Chris, she's taking advantage of you. She doesn't need another new phone. Her old one works perfectly fine." But he'd just shake his head adamantly. "Alicia, you don't understand. I have to make up for all the years I missed when she was growing up. Just let me do this for her, okay?" And so it went, with Emily constantly working her wiles to get clothes, cars, vacations, you name it. While we lived comfortably, we certainly weren't the millionaires she seemed to think. But Chris never put his foot down, blindly indulging her every whim, no matter how outrageous or expensive. "Stop spoiling her rotten," I'd snap at him during our worst fights. "You're only encouraging her entitled, manipulative behavior." Chris's brow would furrow, anger flashing in his eyes. "Don't you dare talk about my daughter that way. She's been through enough. The least I can do is give her what she wants." His words sliced through me, the implication clear. Emily's needs would always come before mine. Before us. During Emily's college years, she pulled similar stunts to earn Chris's approval, regaling him with tales of her academic achievements and grand future plans, all while throwing me contemptuous glances, making it clear I'd never be a part of that brighter future she dreamed of. "I got an internship at a prestigious law firm," she announced one night at dinner, chin raised defiantly as she stared me down. "They said I'm on track to be a partner after I finish my degree." "That's wonderful, Pumpkin," Chris gushed, looking at her with naked pride. He turned to me expectantly. "Alicia, doesn't that sound impressive?" I forced a tight smile. "Yes, very impressive. Congratulations, Emily." She sneered at my lukewarm praise. "You could at least try to act like you care about my accomplishments." The hurt must have shown on my face because Chris immediately turned on me with a glare. "She's right, Alicia. You could be a bit more supportive." My cheeks burned with humiliation as his words washed over me. What did I have to do? Grovel at her feet? This pattern continued for years. Emily constantly one-upping me and rubbing her triumphs in my face, Chris fawning over her while admonishing me for not being sufficiently awed by his precious daughter's perfection. By the time Emily finished college and began working, the resentment and bitterness had driven an unbridgeable chasm in my marriage. We could barely look at each other without dredging up the emotional scars, the unhealed wounds of two parents caught in the merciless grip of divided loyalties. "I love you, Alicia, but she's my little girl," Chris would say helplessly during our worst clashes, as if those words could somehow justify or excuse the hell my life had become. I understood in a way. Emily was his flesh and blood, the living embodiment of the family he'd lost through his own failings. Making it up to her, regaining her approval, it had become his singular obsession. But at what cost? By allowing her hatred and manipulation to fester unchecked, Chris had enabled a rift that may never be mendable, a rift that would soon tear our whole world asunder. Little did I know that the worst was still to come, and that Chris's death would be the spark that ignited Emily's rage into an unholy blaze of vengeance. I'll never forget the night Chris died. We were having one of our usual tense dinners, the air thick with unspoken resentments. Emily had just announced some new career triumph, basking in her father's adoring praise while shooting me smug looks from across the table. Suddenly, Chris gasped and clutched at his chest, his face drained of color. Alicia. In an instant, I was by his side as he crumpled from his chair. "Chris, oh my God, somebody call 911. Emily just stood there, eyes wide with shock, making no move to help. I shot her a pleading look as I cradled Chris's head in my lap. "Emily, please, your father needs help." That seemed to snap her out of her daze. She fumbled for her phone with trembling hands and dialed emergency services. I stroked Chris's clammy forehead, murmuring desperate reassurances that everything would be okay, but his eyes had already taken on a glassy, distant look. His lips moved soundlessly as the life drained from his stricken body. The paramedics arrived and worked furiously to resuscitate him. But it was too late. Chris was gone, claimed by a massive heart attack at just 50 years old. I remember letting out a wail of anguished grief as they gently pulled me away, the love of my life now still and lifeless on the floor. Emily collapsed into a chair, face white as a sheet, looking more lost and afraid than I'd ever seen her. At the hospital, After they'd taken Chris away, Emily turned on me with undisguised fury burning in her red-rimmed eyes. You monster," she cried, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can pretend to care for me now, after everything you've done, after how you treated my dad?" I recoiled, struck by the naked hatred radiating from her slight frame. "Emily, what are you talking about? I loved your father with all my heart." "Don't give me that crap." She jabbed a finger at my chest, her whole body trembling with rage. "You manipulated him from the start, wormed your way into our lives to get your hands on his money." Tears stung my eyes as her vicious words cut deep. "That's not true at all. Chris and I—" "Save it," she spat. "I'm going to make sure you don't get a single cent from him. You're nothing now that he's gone." A lump formed in my throat as the weight of her threat hit me. Oh, God, with Chris deceased, what would happen to me? To my whole life? The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and grieving relatives. Emily was cold and distant, refusing to so much as look at me. I felt like a pariah in my own life, the outsider once more. Then came the reading of the will. We gathered at the lawyer's office, Emily shooting me hateful glares from across the room. When the attorney opened the sealed documents, a hush fell over us all. "To my beloved wife Alicia," the lawyer read solemnly, "I leave the majority of my assets and holdings, including the house, investments, and—" "No!" Emily screeched, leaping to her feet. All eyes turned to her as she stabbed an accusing finger at me. "She manipulated him. That money is rightfully mine." I shrank in my seat, bracing for the onslaught as Emily's eruption of fury washed over me in waves. The lawyer tried to interject, but she was unstoppable, years of pent-up hatred and resentment finally unleashed. "You're going to pay for this?" she hissed, her chest heaving. "If it's the last thing I do, I'll make you suffer for what you've done to my family. You hear me? You're going to wish you never laid eyes on us." As a deathly silence descended, I knew with sinking dread that Emily's vicious threat was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was about to find myself in the fight of my life. Emily's meltdown at the reading of Chris's will was just the beginning of her crusade against me. In the days that followed, she launched into a relentless campaign of harassment and intimidation. "That money should be mine," she'd scream whenever she saw me. "You manipulated my dad into cutting me out." Her angry accusations followed me everywhere, the grocery store, the gym, even taking out the trash. She seemed determined to make my life a living hell at every turn. One afternoon, I arrived home from running errands to find her camped out on my front porch, eyes blazing with fury. "There you are, you lying, gold-digging witch," she spat as I approached. "Did you really think you could just take everything from me like that?" I sighed wearily. "Emily, please. Your father wanted me taken care of after he was gone. That's all this is." "Bullshit!" She shot to her feet, fists clenched. "I know you poisoned his mind against me over the years, turned him against his own flesh and blood." "That's not true at all," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "I never tried to come between you two. Chris loved you more than anything." Emily barked a harsh laugh. "Yeah, and look where that got him, dead before his time, while you swooped in like a vulture to pick over the remains." The cruel words lanced through me like daggers. I blinked back tears, suddenly regretting my fruitless attempts to reason with her. "Just go, Emily," I said quietly, "before one of us says something we can't take back." For a beat, her face contorted in an almost feral snarl. Then, without warning, she lunged at me, hands outstretched like talons. I gasped and stumbled back as she made a grab for my hair, her long nails raking my cheek. "You evil, manipulative bitch." Instinctively, I shoved her away, sending her staggering backwards. She caught her balance, and we stared at each other, chests heaving, an unspoken line crossed. Emily's expression morphed into a vicious leer. "Don't think this is over. Not by a long shot. I'm going to destroy you. Do you hear me? Destroy. You." With that, she whirled and stormed off, leaving me shaken and nursing the welt already forming on my face. Over the next few weeks, the attacks escalated from the verbal to the undeniably criminal. My car tires were slashed repeatedly. Nasty, obscene graffiti was spray-painted across my garage door. Even a brick came crashing through my front window one night, narrowly missing my head. I went to the authorities, but they could do little without catching Emily in the act. She was careful to leave no fingerprints or witnesses, her bright future as a hotshot lawyer always at the forefront of her calculated attacks. "Please, you have to do something," I begged the detective assigned to my case. "She's unhinged, a complete danger to herself and others." The gruff officer just shrugged, unmoved. "Look, lady, I get that you're going through a tough time, but without hard evidence, there's not much we can do about a family dispute over some money." My protests fell on deaf ears. Emily had me cornered, and she knew it. The assaults just kept coming. Vile letters filled with threats and accusations, scratches along the sides of my car, and that malicious presence always lurking. I became afraid to leave my own home, jumping at every sudden noise or movement. The stress and fear were taking a heavy toll, both emotionally and physically. Some nights I lay awake for hours, haunted by memories of Chris's warm smile and gentle touch, things I'd likely never experience again. That's when I realized with sinking dread that Emily's revenge went far deeper than mere money or inheritance. This was about stripping me of everything: my home, my safety, my very identity as Chris's wife, until I had nothing left but the torment of her hatred bearing down like a crushing weight. Something had to be done. I couldn't go on living like this, a prisoner in my own life. It was time to fight back, no matter how ugly or painful it became. Little did I know that confronting Emily's cruelty head-on would blow the lid off an even darker, more disturbing truth, and set me on a collision course from which there could be no return. I realized Emily's vendetta against me went far deeper than just jealousy or resentment over the inheritance. There was a twisted, almost pathological hatred burning within her, fueled by years of manipulation and deceit. The truth began to unravel when I was going through some old storage boxes and came across Chris's laptop from a few years back. On a whim, I booted it up and started browsing through his files, my heart aching at every photo and document reminding me of happier times. That's when I stumbled across a folder simply labeled Emily. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it and began reading through the contents: emails, text messages, even voice recordings spanning years. Evidence of Emily's ongoing lies, sabotage, and efforts to undermine my relationship with Chris. It was all there in sickening detail. Fake emergencies and crises designed to pull Chris away from me. Exaggerated stories about me mistreating or neglecting her, voiced through teary phone calls pleading for her daddy's comfort and support. Even admissions from Emily about seeing a therapist for anger issues aimed at deliberately alienating me from the family. My blood boiled as I absorbed the damning messages one by one. So many of our marital problems, the endless fights and heartache, could be traced directly back to Emily's calculated machinations over the years. The vicious, remorseless depths she had sunk to in order to maintain her vice-like grip over Chris. When I finished reading through it all, I sat in stunned silence, tears of rage streaming down my cheeks. This whole time she had been gaslighting not just me, but her own father as well, playing us both like finely tuned instruments in her twisted campaign of sociopathic jealousy. That night, when Emily came barging into my home yet again to hurl more vile accusations, I was ready. I grabbed her by the wrist as she advanced, spinning her around and slamming her against the wall. "Let go of me," she snarled, struggling against my grip. "I'll have you arrested for assault." "Shut up and listen for once," I growled through gritted teeth. "I know what you've been doing all these years, you manipulative little monster." Her eyes went wide, jaw-dropping in an almost comical display of shock. What are you talking about?" Rather than explain, I released her and retrieved Chris's laptop from the other room, pulling up the file folder I'd uncovered earlier. Emily's eyes went flinty as she began scanning the documents and recordings, her mask of innocence shattering with each new revelation. "So this is how it's going to be," she spat, color rising in her cheeks. "You were always jealous of me and Dad's relationship. This is just some pathetic attempt to turn him against me, even in death." I could only stare at her in disbelief. "Are you deranged? Look at the evidence right in front of you. The lies, the sabotage. You had no problem deceiving and manipulating us to get what you wanted. Your own father," Emily sneered. "Please, he always took your side no matter what I did. Don't try pinning that on me." "You're sick. I shot back, disgust roiling in the pit of my stomach. You've been playing the victim for years, but you're the one inflicting all this misery and destruction on this family. Her nostrils flared, lips peeling back in an ugly snarl. This is far from over, you self-righteous bitch. In fact, it's only just beginning. She grabbed the laptop and hurled it against the far wall with a resounding crash, shattering the screen into a twisted spiderweb of shards. Then she whirled and stormed out, leaving a path of destruction in her wake. I sank to the floor, hands trembling as the full, ugly reality sank in. Whatever twisted psychological games Emily had been playing all this time, they had clearly warped her perception of reality entirely. There would be no getting through to her, no appeals to sanity or reason. I was well and truly trapped in her vengeful crusade. And as the ominous weight of her final threat hovered over me, I knew this was only the opening salvo of a war that could ultimately consume us both. After my confrontation with Emily and the chilling discovery of her years-long deception, I knew I had to take a stand once and for all. Her vindictive crusade had spiraled completely out of control. If I didn't put a stop to it immediately, there was no telling how far she might go. A few days later, I requested a meeting with Emily and laid it all on the line. We convened at a stuffy corporate office downtown, the air thick with distrust and barely concealed hostility. Emily swept in, wearing a power suit and permanent sneer, all false bravado and entitlement. Well, well, if it isn't the wicked stepmonster herself, to what do I owe this dubious pleasure? I squared my shoulders, mustering every ounce of resolve. Cut the act, Emily. We're done playing games here. Oh? She arched an immaculately groomed eyebrow. Is that so? Because from where I'm sitting, you're the one who needs to quit while you're behind. Jaw clenched. I slid a thick manila envelope across the table towards her. I have ironclad proof of your years of manipulation and sabotage. The lies, the fake emergencies, even admitting to therapy explicitly designed to alienate me from your father. Emily's bravado flickered for just a moment before her sneer returned full force. So you've got some circumstantial evidence, so what? That doesn't change the fact that he chose you over his own daughter in the end. Don't you get it? I shot back, anger rising. Your jealousy and entitlement drove a wedge between you two long before Chris died. He spent years enabling your behavior, indulging your every selfish whim. That struck a nerve. Emily's nostrils flared as she leaned across the table, eyes blazing. How dare you? You think you can psychoanalyze me when you're the one who wormed your way into our lives? Dad loved me more than anything until you showed up. I shook my head sadly. Emily, wake up. Your whole perception of reality has become dangerously warped. I'm not the enemy here. I'm the one trying to help you see the truth about yourself before it's too late. She opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of it, snapping it shut again, as her expression contorted in disgust. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with venom. You're right about one thing. This does end today, but not how you think. She rose abruptly from her seat, knocking it over with a clatter. I'm taking you down, one way or another. Maybe then Dad's memory can finally be at peace, free from your poisonous influence. Emily, listen to yourself, I pleaded, alarmed by the maniacal glint in her eyes. You're unraveling. Whatever delusions you've been clinging to, it's time to let go. But she was already stalking away, shoulders squared and fists clenched. Over her shoulder, she spat. Don't worry, you smug bitch. When I'm through with you, everyone will finally understand my side of things. I'll make sure of it. After she stormed out, I sat in stunned silence, emotions churning. Despite laying everything on the table, Emily was too far gone, her hatred too entrenched. There would be no reasoning with her, no bringing her back from the brink of her self-destructive obsession. In that moment, I made a difficult choice. For my own safety and sanity, I would have to cut Emily out of my life completely. She had made her bed, and now she would be forced to lie in it, dealing with the consequences of her malice and delusion. I consulted legal counsel and began the process of freezing Emily out of Chris's assets and estate. The lawyers warned it would be an uphill battle, given her unrelenting stance, but I didn't care. Even if it meant draining my own funds to the last penny, I was prepared to fight her tooth and nail. True to form, Emily came unhinged when the court orders went through, locking her out of further claiming her inheritance. She launched an all-out legal war, hiring a team of vicious attack dog attorneys committed to paint me as the villain at any cost. But I was ready this time. With Chris's true legacy, the evidence of Emily's treachery and manipulation on my side, I weathered the vicious court battles with grim determination. Time and again, her attempts to strong-arm and bully me were thwarted by cold, hard proof. The protracted legal maelstrom bled Emily's finances dry, her shiny new career as a hotshot lawyer in jeopardy as creditors came knocking. In a cosmic twist of karma, she even faced potential disbarment as her dirty tactics and suspect actions unraveled into the harsh light. Through it all, I refused to back down or compromise. This was about more than money. It was about stripping away the twisted facade Emily had been hiding behind her whole life, forcing her to finally face the ugly reality of her own misdeeds and delusions. In the end, she brought the ruin upon herself. But I had reclaimed something infinitely more valuable than any inheritance: my self-respect, sense of justice, and the ability to move forward with Chris's loving memory intact. As the dust settled and I surveyed the wreckage Emily's hatred had wrought, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. For all the pain she'd caused, some small part of me still mourned the loss of what could have been a real bond, a sincere connection with my husband's child. A true family united through more than shared trauma and resentment. But I knew, deep down, that dream had died long ago, poisoned by Emily's all-consuming jealousy before it ever had a chance to bloom. She had made her choices repeatedly and with malice in her heart, and now she alone would have to live with the consequences. As for me, it was time to step into a new chapter, free from the shackles of the past and filled with hard-won wisdom. Though the scars would never fully heal, I carried Chris's spirit with me, determined to honor his memory by embracing life and love once more. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, practicing the fake smile I had perfected over the years. My heart sank as Melanie's cruel words replayed in my mind. Just to be clear, you are nor never will be a part of this family. So don't expect to be at my wedding. Her icy tone cut through me like a knife, reopening old wounds I thought had long healed. I had sacrificed so much for Doug and his daughter, enduring years of hostility and rejection from Melanie, all in the hopes of one day being accepted as part of their family. It was a harsh reminder of how far I had come, from a driven career woman who once prioritized success over personal relationships to a devoted wife and stepmother. Meeting Doug at that corporate event years ago had been a whirlwind romance, and his warmth and earnestness had melted my icy exterior. Little did I know that marrying a single father would be the greatest challenge of my life. Melanie, then a precocious 10-year-old, had made it clear from the start that I was an unwelcome intruder in her world. My attempts at bonding were met with indifference or outright hostility. The forgotten lunchboxes, the skipped school events, and the blatant disrespect were all painful reminders that I would never truly be accepted as her mother. Doug tried his best to bridge the gap, but even he couldn't control Melanie's escalating defiance as she entered her teenage years. The lies, the stolen money, and the constant arguments strained our marriage to its limits. And now, as Melanie prepared to marry Trent, a wealthy architect from a prominent family, she had made it abundantly clear that I would never be a part of her life. Her hurtful words, "You're just an ATM and a maid, my real mom's family, not you," had shattered any remaining hope I harbored. But this time I wouldn't sit idly by and accept her cruelty. A plan was forming in my mind. A carefully orchestrated revenge that would expose Melanie's true colors and the deceit she had woven around her perfect life. As I looked into the mirror, I saw a steely determination in my eyes, a resolve born from years of hurt and rejection. This time I would be the one holding the cards, and Melanie would learn the hard way that actions have consequences. I couldn't help but smile as I reminisced about the day I first met Doug. It was at a corporate event, and I was immediately drawn to his warm, genuine demeanor. Little did I know that our chance encounter would lead to a whirlwind romance and a life-altering decision. Doug was a divorced father of one, and his 10-year-old daughter Melanie was his world. He spoke of her with such pride and adoration that I couldn't help but be charmed. When he asked me out for coffee, I agreed without hesitation. intrigued by this man who seemed to have his priorities in order. Over the next few months, our connection deepened, and I found myself falling for Doug's kindness and unwavering devotion to his daughter. He was a stark contrast to the ruthless corporate world I was accustomed to, and his gentle nature was a breath of fresh air. It wasn't long before Doug proposed, and I said yes without a second thought. I was ready to take on the role of a stepmother, confident that with time and effort, Melanie would come to accept me as part of her family. Little did I know that the road ahead would be paved with obstacles and heartbreak. From the moment I moved in, Melanie made it clear that I was an unwelcome intruder. Her icy glares and cold shoulders were a constant reminder that I was an outsider in her world. I tried everything I could to connect with her, from baking her favorite treats to attending her school events, but she remained distant and aloof. "Why don't you just leave us alone?" she would snap whenever I attempted to engage with her. "You'll never be my real mom." Doug tried to intervene, but Melanie's defiance only grew stronger as she entered her teenage years. She began skipping school, lying to us, and even stealing money from my purse. Each incident was like a dagger to my heart, and I couldn't help but question whether I had made the right decision in marrying into this family. "Please, Melanie, give Rita a chance," Doug would plead, his voice laced with desperation. "She loves you like her own." But Melanie was having none of it. "She's not my mother, and she never will be," she would snarl, her eyes filled with disdain. As the years passed, the rift between us only widened, and I found myself retreating into my work as a means of escape. I had sacrificed so much for this family, and yet I felt like a stranger in my own home. But now, with Melanie's wedding looming, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be the turning point, the moment when she would finally accept me as part of her life. Little did I know that her cruelty would reach new heights, shattering any remaining illusions I had about our relationship. As Melanie entered her teenage years, her defiance and hostility towards me reached new heights. I couldn't count the number of times I had come home to find her room in disarray, clothes strewn across the floor, and the lingering scent of smoke hanging in the air. "Melanie, we need to talk about this," I would say, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and concern. She would simply roll her eyes and brush me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Mind your own business. You're not my mother." Those words, uttered with such venom, never failed to cut me deep. I had tried so hard to be a positive influence in her life, to be the supportive and nurturing figure she so desperately needed, but my efforts were met with nothing but contempt. Doug, bless his heart, did his best to mediate the situation, but even his pleas fell on deaf ears. "Melanie, please show some respect," he would say, his brow furrowed with worry. "Rita is trying her best." "Trying her best at what?" Melanie would snarl, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "Trying to replace my real mom? Well, newsflash, it's never going to happen." Her words stung like a slap to the face, and I couldn't help but feel like a failure. No matter how hard I tried, I could never seem to bridge the gap between us. Things only got worse as Melanie's rebellion escalated. She began skipping school, lying about her whereabouts, and even stealing money from my purse to fund her escapades. I would come home to find my carefully packed lunch for her untouched, the sandwiches growing stale and the fruit withering away. "Where have you been?" I would demand, my heart racing with fear and frustration. "None of your business," she would snap, brushing past me without a second glance. The final straw came at one of her high school events, where I had gone out of my way to attend, hoping to show my support and perhaps finally earn a modicum of respect from her. But as I approached her group of friends, smiling and waving, Melanie's reaction was nothing short of devastating. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "You're not my mother. Stop pretending you are." The words hung in the air like a thick, suffocating fog, and I could feel the eyes of her friends upon me, judging and pitying me in equal measure. In that moment, I had never felt more embarrassed, more humiliated, and more like an outsider in my own family. As I retreated, hot tears stinging my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder how much more of Melanie's cruelty I could endure. I had sacrificed so much for this family, for the dream of being accepted and loved, but it seemed like a lost cause. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come, and Melanie's vicious words on the eve of her wedding would be the final straw that unleashed a storm of revenge that had been brewing for years. When Melanie announced her engagement to Trent, a young, ambitious architect from a wealthy family, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be the turning point in our relationship, the moment when she would finally accept me as part of her life. But as I soon discovered, my optimism was misplaced. Trent was a charming young man, with a confident demeanor and a bright future ahead of him. As he and Melanie shared the details of their whirlwind romance, I couldn't help but be struck by the stark contrast between them. He was poised and articulate, while Melanie seemed almost childlike in his presence, her usual defiance replaced by a strange docility. "We're so excited to start this new chapter together," Trent gushed, his arm draped protectively around Melanie's shoulders. I forced a smile, pushing down the nagging doubts that had begun to surface. "Congratulations," I said, my voice strained. "I'm so happy for you both." Melanie barely acknowledged me, her eyes fixed on Trent with an almost worshipful gaze. It was as if I was invisible, a mere footnote in her life. As the wedding planning began, Melanie's true colors quickly resurfaced. She became increasingly dismissive and condescending towards me, treating me more like a servant than a member of the family. "Rita, can you make sure the caterers have everything they need?" she would bark, her tone laced with impatience. When I tried to offer suggestions or input, she would shut me down with a wave of her hand. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it," she would say, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Just leave the important decisions to the real family." And then, just days before the wedding, the final blow came. "Just to be clear," Melanie said, her words slicing through me like a knife, "you are nor never will be a part of this family, so don't expect to be at my wedding." The venom in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. After years of trying, of sacrificing, of enduring her cruelty in the hopes of one day being accepted, she had made it abundantly clear that I would never be anything more than an outsider. "You're just an ATM and a maid," she spat, her eyes narrowed with contempt. "My real mom's family, not you." In that moment, something shifted within me. The hurt and anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for years finally boiled over, and a newfound sense of determination took hold. I would no longer be the victim, the one who cowered and accepted her abuse. It was time for me to take control, to orchestrate a plan that would bring Melanie's carefully constructed world crashing down around her. As I watched her fawn over Trent and his wealthy family, a seed of an idea began to take root. If she wanted to treat me like an outsider, then I would make sure she got her wish, and so much more. The wheels were in motion, and Melanie's precious wedding day would be the stage for a revenge years in the making. With a newfound determination burning within me, I set my plan into motion. Melanie thought she could treat me like an outsider, like a mere servant in her grand scheme of things. Well, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I started by discreetly digging into her financial records, scouring through bank statements and credit card bills. It didn't take long to uncover a trail of deceit and mishandling that would make even the most seasoned con artist blush. Hidden bank accounts, credit cards maxed out on extravagant purchases, and a lifestyle far beyond what her meager income could support. It was all there, laid bare before my eyes. Melanie had been living a lie, and I had the evidence to prove it. At first, Doug was hesitant when I presented my findings to him. He had always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth over the tensions between Melanie and me. But as the depth of her deception became clear, even he couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. "This is serious, Rita," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "If what you're saying is true, she could be facing legal consequences." I nodded, my jaw set in determination. "Believe me, it's all true. And it's time she learns that actions have consequences." With Doug reluctantly on board, I began to meticulously plan my revenge. Every detail had to be perfect, every move calculated to ensure maximum impact on Melanie's precious wedding day. I reached out to my network of contacts, calling in favors and greasing palms to ensure that the right people would be in the right place at the right time. It was a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of chess where one wrong move could topple the entire house of cards. But I was determined, fueled by years of rejection and humiliation at the hands of Melanie. This was my moment, my chance to finally take control and show her just how far I was willing to go to protect myself and my family. As the wedding day drew closer, the tension in our household was palpable. Melanie strutted around like a queen, barking orders and treating us all like her personal servants. Doug tried his best to keep the peace, but even he couldn't hide the concern etched onto his face. "Are you sure about this, Rita?" he asked me one night, his voice hushed and tinged with worry. I gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, my confidence unwavering. "Trust me, Doug. It's time for Melanie to face the consequences of her actions." And as I finalized the last details of my plan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation coursing through my veins. Melanie had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the storm that was about to descend upon her carefully curated world. The stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise on what promised to be the most dramatic and satisfying revenge I had ever orchestrated. The wedding day dawned bright and sunny, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to unfold. As Doug and I arrived at the lavish venue, I could feel the anticipation building in the pit of my stomach. This was it, the moment I had been carefully orchestrating for months. Melanie, resplendent in her white gown, was already ensconced in the bridal suite, surrounded by her attendants and a flurry of activity. She barely acknowledged our presence, too caught up in the whirlwind of her own self-importance. "Just make sure you stay out of the way," she snapped at me, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "This is my day, and I won't have you ruining it." I forced a smile, nodding obediently. "Of course, Melanie, whatever you say." As the guests began to arrive, the tension in the air was palpable. Trent's family, with their impeccable pedigree and designer outfits, mingled among the crowd, casting disapproving glances in our direction. Doug fidgeted nervously beside me, his fingers tapping against his leg in a restless rhythm. "Are you sure about this, Rita?" he whispered, his voice laced with concern. I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, my resolve unwavering. "Trust me, Doug, it's time for the truth to come out." As the ceremony began, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. The first domino was about to fall, setting off a chain reaction that would shatter Melanie's carefully constructed facade. And then, just as the officiant was about to begin the vows, a commotion erupted at the back of the venue. All eyes turned to see a delivery man pushing his way through the crowd, a large envelope clutched in his hand. "Delivery for Mr. Trent Holloway," he announced, his voice echoing through the hushed silence. Trent's brow furrowed in confusion as he stepped forward to accept the package. "What is this?" he muttered, tearing open the envelope. That's when all hell broke loose. As Trent rifled through the contents of the envelope, his face contorted into a mask of shock and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, his voice trembling with rage. Melanie's eyes widened in panic as she rushed to his side. "Trent, what's going on?" But Trent wasn't listening. He held up the damning evidence, his eyes boring into Melanie's with a mixture of betrayal and disgust. "How could you, Melanie? All these lies, all this deception?" The guests erupted into a flurry of whispers and gasps, their perfectly coiffed heads swiveling between the two like spectators at a tennis match. Melanie's face drained of color, her lips trembling as she tried to formulate a response. "Trent, I can explain." But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As Trent continued to confront Melanie, laying bare her web of lies and financial misdeeds, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction washing over me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Melanie's cruelty and deceit would finally come crashing down around her. "Trent, how could you do this now?" she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. But Trent was having none of it. "How could I?" he roared, his face twisted with fury. "How could you, Melanie? You've been lying to me, to all of us, from the very beginning." As the chaos unfolded, I caught Doug's eye from across the room. He gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the justice that was being served. And in that moment, as Melanie's world crumbled before our very eyes, I knew that I had finally taken control. The years of rejection, the constant belittling, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family, It had all led to this moment of sweet, satisfying revenge. Melanie may have thought she could treat me like a servant, but in the end, it was I who had pulled the strings, orchestrating her downfall with precision and cunning. And as the repercussions of her actions began to rain down upon her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, a validation that my sacrifices and pain had not been in vain. The curtain had fallen on Melanie's grand charade, and I was the one left standing, triumphant and unapologetic. As the chaos unfolded around us, it was as if time itself had ground to a halt. The lavish wedding venue, once a vision of elegance and grandeur, had been transformed into a battleground of betrayal and recrimination. Trent's face was contorted with fury, his fingers clenched tightly around the damning evidence of Melanie's deceit. "How could you do this to me, Melanie?" he roared, his voice reverberating through the hushed silence. "How could you lie and manipulate me like this?" Melanie, for once, was at a loss for words. Her carefully cultivated facade of poise and confidence had shattered, revealing the true colors of her selfish and manipulative nature. She opened and closed her mouth like a gasping fish, her eyes darting frantically around the room, seeking an escape from the harsh glare of judgment that surrounded her. "Trent, please?" She finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling with desperation. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." But Trent wasn't having any of it. With a swift motion, he tore off the ring that had symbolized their ill-fated union, hurling it to the ground with a clatter. "There's nothing to explain, Melanie," he spat, his eyes narrowed with contempt. "You've been playing me for a fool from the very beginning, and I won't stand for it any longer." Around us, the guests erupted into a cacophony of whispers and gasps, their perfectly coiffed heads swiveling back and forth like spectators at a tennis match. Melanie's own family, the ones she had held in such high regard, recoiled in horror, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and disgust. And in the midst of it all, there was Doug, standing by my side, his hand clasped tightly in mine. "We're here just to see the truth come out," he murmured, his voice laced with a strange sense of resignation. "Justice doesn't need an invitation." As the confrontation between Trent and Melanie escalated, the details of her deception spilled forth like a foul-smelling torrent. Hidden bank accounts, fraudulent loans, and a litany of lies that had formed the very foundation of her carefully constructed life. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Melanie's face contorted with rage, her eyes narrowing into slits as she turned her gaze towards me. "You," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "This was you, wasn't it? You're behind all of this." I met her accusation with a steady gaze, unflinching in the face of her fury. "I merely provided the truth, Melanie," I said, my voice calm and measured. "You're the one who chose to live a lie." With those words, it was as if a dam had burst within her. Melanie let loose a torrent of vitriol, hurling insults and threats in my direction with reckless abandon. But her words held no power over me anymore. I had finally broken free from the shackles of her cruelty, and I reveled in the sweet taste of vindication. As the chaos swirled around us, I caught sight of Trent's family huddled together, their faces etched with grim determination. It was clear that the legal repercussions of Melanie's actions were already taking shape, and the consequences she had so carelessly ignored were about to come crashing down upon her. And in that moment, as I watched the very foundation of her carefully curated world crumble before my eyes, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph wash over me. The years of rejection, the constant belittling, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family, it had all led to this moment of sweet, satisfying justice. Melanie may have thought she could treat me like a servant, but in the end it was I who had pulled the strings, orchestrating her downfall with precision and cunning. And as the repercussions of her actions began to rain down upon her, I knew that my sacrifices and pain had not been in vain. The curtain had fallen on Melanie's grand charade, and I was left standing tall, vindicated, and unapologetic. Justice, it seemed, had finally found its way home. In the aftermath of Melanie's grand unraveling, the world seemed to move in slow motion. The once pristine wedding venue lay in shambles, a crumpled reminder of the charade that had come undone with such spectacular force. As the dust settled, the true extent of Melanie's deception became painfully clear. Lawsuits from Trent's family rained down like a relentless storm, each one a damning indictment of her lies and financial misdeeds. Charges of fraud and embezzlement loomed large, casting a dark shadow over her once promising future. And through it all, Melanie remained defiant, lashing out at anyone who dared to cross her path. "You'll all pay for this," she snarled, her eyes wild with fury. "Nobody does this to me and gets away with it." But her threats rang hollow, mere echoes of the power she had once wielded with such impunity. The world had seen her for who she truly was, a manipulative, deceitful woman who had built her life on a foundation of lies. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Doug and I found ourselves caught in the eye of the storm. Lawyers and investigators swarmed around us, their questions probing and relentless. But through it all, we stood united, a bulwark against the chaos that threatened to engulf us. "We did the right thing," Doug would murmur, his hand clasped tightly in mine. "She brought this upon herself." And as the months wore on, the once indomitable Melanie began to crumble under the weight of her own actions. The family she had once held in such high esteem turned their backs on her, their disdain and disappointment a palpable force. Even her own mother, Nancy, couldn't bring herself to defend her daughter's actions. "I never thought she would stoop so low," she confessed to me one day, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Where did I go wrong? It was a question that haunted us all, a reminder that sometimes even the best of intentions can lead to the darkest of outcomes. But through it all, I found solace in the knowledge that justice had been served. Melanie's reign of terror had come to an end, and the scars she had inflicted upon our family were finally beginning to heal. As the chaos subsided and a new sense of normalcy began to take hold, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. The path had been long and arduous, paved with heartache and sacrifice, but in the end, it had all been worth it. And then, just when I thought the world couldn't possibly hold any more surprises, fate intervened with a gift more precious than I could have ever imagined. It was a crisp autumn morning when I felt the first flutters of life within me, a subtle reminder that even in the darkest of moments, hope can still take root. As the realization dawned upon me, tears of joy streamed down my face, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. When I shared the news with Doug, his eyes lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in years. "A new beginning," he whispered, pulling me close. "A chance to do things right." And as we stood there basking in the warmth of our newfound happiness, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. The past had been a tumultuous journey, but now, with the weight of Melanie's cruelty lifted from our shoulders, we were free to embrace the future with open arms. This time, I vowed, things would be different. Our family would be built on a foundation of love, respect, and understanding, a stark contrast to the pain and betrayal that had once threatened to tear us apart. As I cradled my growing belly, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of the little life growing within me. This child would know only love, only acceptance, and would never have to endure the heartache that had once been our constant companion. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a new dawn was breaking. One filled with hope, forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt usually lulled me into a trance, but this time my parents' hushed conversation jolted me awake. Something about their tones made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Once we drop him off, we'll finally be free of this burden," Dad muttered. My heart rate spiked. Were they talking about me? No, it couldn't be. Mom glanced over her shoulder, her eyes meeting mine through the rearview mirror. A fleeting look of discomfort crossed her face before she turned back to Dad. "He'll be fine. We've arranged everything. It's for the best," she said, her voice strained. A knot formed in my stomach as I realized the truth. They were discussing abandoning me, their own son. Memories of their emotional distance and indifference flooded my mind, suddenly making sense. The car fell silent, but the tension was palpable. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I studied their tense expressions, searching for any hint of remorse or hesitation. There was none. As the miles ticked by, my confusion morphed into a simmering anger. How could they do this to their own child? Didn't they care about me at all? When we stopped at a rest area, Dad announced he needed to stretch his legs. Mom followed suit, leaving me alone in the car. I watched them disappear into the building, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. Moments later, the engine roared to life and the car jolted forward. Through the rear window, I saw them standing motionless, their faces devoid of emotion, as they watched me being driven away by their own hands. Tears of anger and betrayal stung my eyes as the reality sank in. They had planned this all along. My own parents had abandoned me, casting me aside like an unwanted burden. In that moment, something shifted within me. I would not let them get away with this. I would expose their deceit and reclaim my dignity, no matter what it took. This was not the end, but the beginning of my fight for justice. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed to a stop. My heart raced as I contemplated my next move. Should I confront the driver? Try to escape? The uncertainty was suffocating. The driver's door opened and a gruff-looking man peered inside. "You Brady?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I nodded, my mouth dry. He beckoned me to follow him, and we entered a dingy motel room. The pungent smell of cigarette smoke assaulted my nostrils, making me nauseous. "Your folks paid me to bring you here," the man said, tossing a duffel bag onto the bed. "That's all your stuff. They said you'd be fine on your own." My heart sank as the weight of their betrayal crashed over me once again. Abandoned and alone, with nothing but a bag of my belongings. The man left without another word, and I sank onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. Hot tears of anger and despair streamed down my cheeks. How could they do this to me? After what felt like hours, I wiped my eyes and rummaged through the duffel bag, desperate for any clue as to their motives. That's when I found it, a manila envelope tucked away at the bottom. With shaking hands, I tore it open, and my worst fears were confirmed. Legal documents detailing an emancipation petition filed by my own parents seeking to sever all ties with me. They had been planning this for who knows how long, and I had been oblivious. Rage boiled within me as I read through the papers, each line a stinging reminder of their callousness. They claimed I was a financial burden, a hindrance to their lives. Harsh words like unruly and ungrateful jumped off the pages, painting a distorted picture of me that I barely recognized. Tears of anger blurred my vision as I crumpled the papers in my fist. How dare they? After all these years of neglect and emotional absence, they had the audacity to blame me? In that moment, a fire ignited within me, burning away any lingering doubts or attachments. They wanted to be free of me? Fine, but I would not go down without a fight. I would expose their cruelty and deceit, making them face the consequences of their actions. As I formulated a plan, a newfound determination coursed through my veins. I may have been alone, but I was far from helpless. With evidence in hand, I would seek out the one person I knew would have my back. My Aunt Quinlan. Tomorrow, the battle would begin, and this time I would not be the one left behind. The rumble of the truck's engine echoed through the quiet diner as it pulled into the parking lot. I clutched the duffel bag tightly, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. Aunt Quinlan had agreed to meet me here, my last glimmer of hope in this nightmare. As I entered the diner, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon enveloped me, providing a brief moment of comfort. A kind-eyed woman behind the counter gave me a warm smile. "Can I help you, honey?" she asked. "I'm supposed to meet my aunt here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Her expression softened. "You must be Brady. Your aunt called ahead. Go have a seat, and I'll bring you something to eat while you wait." I nodded gratefully and slid into a corner booth, my eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for Aunt Quinlan's familiar face to appear. The diner owner, whose name tag read Tara, brought me a steaming plate of pancakes and a glass of orange juice. "On the house," she said with a wink. "You look like you could use a pick-me-up." I managed a faint smile, overwhelmed by her kindness towards a complete stranger. As I picked at the pancakes, my mind drifted back to the betrayal that had brought me here. The anger and hurt threatened to consume me, but I pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. An hour ticked by, then two, and still no sign of Aunt Quinlan. Doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps she wouldn't show up either. Maybe everyone was content to abandon me. Just as I was about to give up hope, the bell above the diner's door jingled, and a frazzled-looking Quinlan rushed in. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, and she hurried over, enveloping me in a tight embrace. "Brady, thank God you're all right," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I came as soon as I could." She pulled back, holding me at arm's length, her gaze searching mine. "Tell me everything that happened." And so I did, recounting every agonizing detail: the overheard conversation, the abandonment, the legal papers. With each word, Quinlan's expression grew darker, her jaw clenched in fury. "Those bastards," she spat when I finished, her hands balled into fists. How could they do this to their own son? Tara, who had been hovering nearby, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now, sweetie. We won't let them get away with this." Quinlan nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. "They'll pay for what they've done, I promise you that. We'll take them to court, expose their lies, and make sure they face the consequences." Relief washed over me, knowing that I wasn't alone in this fight. With Aunt Quinlan and Tara on my side, I felt a renewed sense of strength. My parents had made a grave mistake in underestimating me. As we gathered our things to leave, Tara pulled me aside. "You take care of yourself, you hear?" she said, pressing a folded napkin into my hand. "And if you ever need a safe place, you come back here." I pocketed the napkin, grateful for her kindness, and followed Quinlan out to her car. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. My parents had thrown me away, but I had found allies who would fight for me no matter what. And in that moment, I knew the battle had just begun. Aunt Quinlan's modest apartment became our base of operations in the days that followed. As soon as we arrived, she sprang into action, making a flurry of phone calls and scouring the internet for resources. "We need to build an airtight case," she declared, her laptop open on the kitchen table. "Those scumbags won't know what hit them." I watched in awe as she navigated the legal maze with practiced ease, jotting down notes and cross-referencing information. It was almost as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "First things first," she said, fixing me with a determined stare. "We need to gather every shred of evidence we can find. Documents, emails, recordings, anything that proves their intent to abandon you." I nodded, recalling the crumpled papers I had stashed in my duffel bag. Quinlan's eyes lit up as I produced them, and she immediately set to work cataloging and organizing the damning evidence. Over the next few days, we pored over the materials, strategizing our approach and anticipating potential counter-arguments from my parents' legal team. Quinlan was relentless, leaving no stone unturned in her quest for justice. "They won't be able to wriggle their way out of this," she assured me, her voice brimming with confidence. "We'll make sure of it." One afternoon, as we were sifting through a stack of old emails, Quinlan let out a triumphant exclamation. "Jackpot!" She brandished a printout, her eyes gleaming. "These emails prove that your parents were planning this for months, maybe even years. They've been squirreling away money, hiding assets, all to ensure they could ditch you and live the high life." My stomach churned as the full weight of their betrayal sank in. They had been methodically plotting to discard me, like I was nothing more than a burdensome inconvenience. Quinlan must have sensed my turmoil because she reached across the table and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "We've got them now, Brady. They won't be able to deny or justify any of this." Her words ignited a newfound determination within me. For too long I had been the victim, powerless and cast aside. But no longer. With Quinlan's guidance, I was arming myself with the tools to fight back, to reclaim my dignity and hold my parents accountable for their despicable actions. Over the next few weeks, we assembled a formidable arsenal, a meticulously organized dossier brimming with irrefutable evidence, a list of potential witnesses and character references, and a game plan for navigating the legal system. "We're ready," Quinlan declared one evening, her eyes blazing with conviction. "It's time to take the fight to them." As I nodded in agreement, a sense of calm washed over me. The road ahead would be arduous, but I was no longer the frightened, abandoned child I had been weeks earlier. With Quinlan by my side, I was a warrior, prepared to battle for justice and make my parents answer for their sins. They had made the grave mistake of underestimating me, and now they would face the consequences of their cruelty. The gloves were off, and I was ready for war. As our legal battle heated up, Aunt Quinlan's determination only intensified. She was like a woman possessed, leaving no stone unturned in her quest for justice. "We need to hit them from every angle," she declared one evening, her laptop illuminating her fierce expression. "They can't be allowed to wriggle out of this." I watched in awe as she meticulously scoured through financial records, legal documents, and even old home videos, searching for any shred of evidence that could bolster our case. "Look at this," she said, beckoning me over to the computer. On the screen was a grainy video clip from my childhood, a birthday party, if the balloons and cake were any indication. At first I didn't understand the significance, but then Quinlan hit play and the sickening truth became clear. There, in the background, my parents sat together on the couch, their expressions cold and disinterested as the younger version of myself blew out the candles. No smiles, no encouragement, just a callous indifference that made my heart clench. "This is proof of emotional neglect," Quinlan said, her voice thick with anger. "We can use it to show a pattern of behavior, a premeditated disregard for your well-being." As we combed through more footage, the evidence mounted. Missed school events, dismissive comments, and even instances where they outright ignored or belittled me. It was a harrowing reminder of the emotional void that had been my childhood. But Quinlan wasn't done yet. She dug deeper, uncovering financial records that painted an even more damning picture. "They've been siphoning money into offshore accounts for years," she revealed, her brow furrowed in disgust, "all while neglecting to provide you with even the most basic necessities." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Not only had they emotionally abandoned me, but they had also deprived me of material support, all to fuel their own selfish desires. As the days wore on, the magnitude of their betrayal grew more staggering with each new discovery. Quinlan remained relentless, her determination to expose their depravity fueling her every move. "They won't be able to buy their way out of this," she vowed, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "We're going to make sure they face the full consequences of their actions, both legally and in the court of public opinion." And so, armed with a mountain of damning evidence, we prepared for the showdown. My parents, once untouchable in my eyes, would soon be brought to their knees, forced to answer for their crimes against their own flesh and blood. As the date of the court hearing loomed closer, a sense of vindication washed over me. For too long I had been the victim, cowering in their shadow. But no more. With Quinlan by my side, I was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior ready to unleash the full weight of justice upon those who had so grievously wronged me. The battle lines were drawn, and there would be no mercy, no quarter given. My parents had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and now they would pay the ultimate price. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Quinlan gripped my hand tightly as we took our seats, her steely gaze fixed on the empty chairs where my parents would soon be sitting. "Stay strong," she whispered. "We've got this." Moments later, the doors swung open, and my parents strode in, flanked by their high-priced legal team. Their arrogant expressions said it all. They believed they were untouchable, that money and power would shield them from consequences. But as our eyes met, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross their faces. Gone was the scared, helpless child they had abandoned. In my eyes, they saw a warrior, armed with the truth and a thirst for justice that would not be denied. The judge called the proceedings to order, and Quinlan wasted no time in launching our offensive. With surgical precision, she laid out the damning evidence, the emancipation papers, the financial records, the home videos, each piece painting a vivid picture of their depravity. "These so-called parents have shown a pattern of callous disregard for their own child's well-being," she declared, her voice ringing out with conviction. "They have subjected him to years of emotional and financial neglect, all while scheming to abandon him like discarded trash." My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but I held their gaze, unflinching. This was their reckoning, and they would bear witness to the full weight of their sins. As the evidence mounted, their composed facades began to crack. Quinlan was relentless, hammering them with fact after fact, leaving no room for denial or excuses. "These documents prove they've been stashing money away for years, depriving their own son of basic necessities," she said, brandishing the financial records, all to fund their selfish desires and ultimate plan to cast him aside. My father's face flushed red with anger, but I met his glare with a defiant stare. No longer would I cower before his intimidation tactics. Finally, it was my turn to take the stand. With trembling hands, I recounted the agonizing details of their betrayal, the overheard conversation, the abandonment, the crushing realization of their true intentions. They left me stranded like a piece of unwanted garbage, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Their own child, tossed aside without a second thought. Tears streamed down my mother's face, but I felt no sympathy. These were crocodile tears, a desperate attempt to salvage what little shred of humanity they had left. As I stepped down from the stand, I caught Quinlan's proud smile. She gave me a subtle nod, a silent affirmation that I had done well. In the end, the judge's verdict was swift and decisive. The emancipation petition was denied, and an investigation into potential criminal charges was ordered. My parents were ordered to pay restitution and undergo mandatory counseling, but their true punishment went far beyond the legal ramifications. As we left the courthouse, a throng of reporters and onlookers greeted us, showering me with support and condemning my parents' heinous actions. In that moment, I realized that true justice had been served. My parents' reputations were in tatters, their selfish desires exposed for all to see. They had been brought to their knees, forced to answer for their cruelty and callousness. As Quinlan ushered me into the waiting car, I caught one final glimpse of my parents. Broken, disgraced, and utterly defeated, and in that moment I felt a sense of catharsis wash over me. The battle was won, and I had emerged victorious. They had underestimated me, and now they had paid the ultimate price. The aftermath of the courtroom battle was both exhilarating and overwhelming. As Quinlan and I stepped out into the swarm of reporters and supporters, the weight of our victory hit me like a tidal wave. "Brady, Brady! Over here!" The reporters clamored, thrusting microphones and cameras in my face. Quinlan wrapped a protective arm around my shoulders, shielding me from the chaos. "Give the kid some space," she barked, her tone leaving no room for argument. As we pushed through the crowd, snippets of their questions reached my ears. "How does it feel to finally get justice? What would you say to your parents now? Are you worried about potential retaliation?" I remained silent, letting Quinlan take the lead as she expertly navigated us to the safety of her car. It was only when the door slammed shut, muffling the frenzy outside, that I finally let out the breath I had been holding. "You did it, kid," Quinlan said, her eyes shining with pride. "You took those bastards down in spectacular fashion." A grin spread across my face as the reality sank in. We had won, not just in the legal sense, but in the court of public opinion as well. My parents' last reputations were in tatters, their misdeeds laid bare for all to see. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, gripping her hand tightly. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Quinlan scoffed, waving off my gratitude. "Don't mention it. Those lowlifes had it coming. Now we just need to make sure they face the full consequences of their actions." Over the next few days, the saga of my parents' betrayal became a national spectacle. News outlets clamored for interviews, and social media buzzed with outrage and support for my cause. Quinlan fielded the requests with a shrewd eye, carefully curating our narrative and leveraging the public outcry to our advantage. "We need to keep the pressure on," she said, poring over the latest headlines. "The more exposure this gets, the harder it will be for them to wriggle out of facing real consequences." And so we rode the wave of public fury, granting strategic interviews and releasing carefully curated evidence that further damned my parents' actions. Their reputations were in free fall, and I reveled in their downward spiral. But even as the world rallied behind me, a part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. These were the people who had brought me into this world, the ones who were supposed to love and nurture me unconditionally. And yet, they had chosen to discard me like worthless trash. Quinlan, ever perceptive, sensed my inner turmoil. "It's okay to feel conflicted, Brady," she said gently. "What they did was unforgivable, but they're still your parents." I nodded, blinking back tears. I just never thought they were capable of something so cruel. Wrapping me in a fierce hug, Quinlan vowed, "They'll get what's coming to them, I promise. And when the dust settles, you'll be able to move on and build the life you deserve, one filled with love and support." As I clung to her, drawing strength from her unwavering presence, I knew she was right. The road ahead would be long, but I had already taken the first steps toward healing and reclaiming my power. My parents had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and now, as their world crumbled around them, I would rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The days following the courtroom battle were a whirlwind of change. As the dust settled, the true extent of my parents' downfall became evident. "They're facing criminal charges," Quinlan announced one morning, her eyes alight with vindication. "Abandonment, child neglect, financial fraud, the whole 9 yards. I nodded solemnly, a mixture of relief and lingering sadness washing over me. As much as I despised their actions, a part of me still yearned for the parents I had once known, the ones who were supposed to love and protect me. But Quinlan's voice snapped me back to reality. "And that's not all. The court has ordered them to pay restitution, along with mandatory counseling and community service." A grim satisfaction coursed through me at the thought of my parents being forced to atone for their sins. They had brought this reckoning upon themselves, and now they would face the full weight of their consequences. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Quinlan wasted no time in solidifying my newfound independence. With her guidance, I navigated the emancipation process, officially severing my legal ties to my parents. "From now on, you're in charge of your own life," she said, her voice brimming with pride as we signed the final paperwork. It was a surreal moment, equal parts exhilarating and daunting. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from the shackles of their control, free to forge my own path without their toxic influence. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new routine, one that finally felt like a true fresh start. Quinlan's modest apartment became my home, a safe haven filled with warmth and support. "You're family now, kid," she said, ruffling my hair affectionately. And family sticks together no matter what. With her unwavering guidance, I began to piece my life back together. We enrolled me in a new school, one with a supportive environment and resources to help me catch up on the education I had missed. "You're a smart kid," Quinlan assured me. "You'll be back on track in no time." And true to her word, I thrived in my new academic setting. The weight of my parents' oppressive expectations had been lifted, replaced by a newfound passion for learning and personal growth. Quinlan also encouraged me to seek counseling, recognizing the deep emotional wounds that needed healing. At first I was hesitant, but her gentle nudging and unwavering support eventually convinced me to take that important step. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see the transformation within myself. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me gradually gave way to a sense of peace and self-acceptance. "You've come a long way, Brady," Quinlan remarked one evening as we shared a homemade meal. "I'm proud of the person you're becoming." Her words filled me with a warmth I had rarely experienced before. The unconditional love and support of a true family. It was a stark contrast to the emotional void I had endured with my parents, and it fueled my determination to continue growing and thriving. As I looked towards the future, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility. The road ahead was uncharted, but for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the map. My parents' betrayal had once threatened to break me, but instead it had forged me into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. And as I embraced the love and guidance of my newfound family, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was worthy, capable, and truly loved. Maya groaned as the shrill ringing of her phone pierced through the silence of her bedroom. She squinted at the clock. It was 3 a.m., just a couple of hours after she had returned from her night shift at the hospital. With a sigh, she grabbed the phone, expecting it to be the hospital calling her back for an emergency. "Hello?" she mumbled groggily. "Maya, it's me." The familiar voice of her husband Reed crackled through the line. "We need to talk." Maya sat upright, suddenly wide awake. There was something in Reed's tone that made her stomach churn with dread. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "I'm leaving you," Reed stated bluntly. "I've met someone else, and I want a divorce." Maya's heart dropped to the pit of her stomach as the words sank in. She had been happily married to Reed for over 20 years, and they had a son together. How could he do this to their family? "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. After everything we've been through together? Reed let out a callous chuckle that sent shivers down Maya's spine. Come on, Maya. You're no spring chicken anymore. I've found someone younger, someone who can give me the excitement and passion that you can't. Maya's hands trembled as she clutched the phone tighter. Who is she? How long has this been going on? Her name is Jill, and that's none of your business. Reed snapped. I want you out of the house by the end of the week. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I'll be generous with the settlement, but I want a clean break. Maya's mind raced, trying to process the bombshell that Reed had just dropped on her. She had always been devoted to their marriage, working long hours as a nurse to support their family while Reed pursued his career. And now he was casting her aside like she meant nothing. You arrogant bastard, Maya spat, her voice dripping with venom. You think you can just waltz in and out of my life as you please? You have no idea what you've just unleashed. Reed scoffed. Save the drama, Maya. Just pack your things and go. I'll be in touch with the divorce papers. And with that, he hung up, leaving Maya seething with rage and betrayal. As the tears streamed down her cheeks, she made a vow to herself. Reed and his little mistress would pay dearly for what they had done to her family. This was just the beginning. After the initial shock of Reed's betrayal wore off, Maya knew she had to take action. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, would only fuel her anger and despair. She needed to gather her wits and fight back. The first order of business was to find a good divorce lawyer. Maya didn't want to go through some run-of-the-mill attorney who would just rubber stamp whatever settlement Reed proposed. No, she needed someone who was a shark, someone who could ruthlessly protect her interests and make Reed pay for what he had done. Maya spent the next few days scouring the internet and making phone calls until she finally found the perfect candidate, Samantha Weston, a pit bull of a lawyer known for her tenacity and her ability to sniff out hidden assets in messy divorces. At their first meeting, Maya laid out the situation bluntly. My husband is leaving me for another woman, she stated, her voice laced with barely contained fury. He thinks he can just discard me like a piece of trash after over 20 years of marriage. Samantha's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the desk. I see, she said, her tone businesslike. And I take it you want to make sure he doesn't get away with it? Maya nodded fiercely. I want to bleed him dry, she hissed, and I want to expose him and his little mistress for the snakes they are. A predatory smile spread across Samantha's face. Then you've come to the right place, Mrs. Westwood. Over the next few weeks, Maya and Samantha worked tirelessly, combing through financial records, tracking down hidden assets, and building an airtight case against Reed. It turned out that the bastard had been squirreling away money for years, no doubt in preparation for his little midlife crisis fling. Look at this, Samantha said one day, sliding a sheaf of papers across the desk. He's got a secret offshore account with over $500,000 in it, and here are the records of him transferring funds to a woman named Jill Hansen. I'm guessing that's his little piece on the side. Maya's hands trembled with rage as she looked at the damning evidence. That snake, she spat. He's been playing me for a fool all these years. Samantha patted her hand reassuringly. Don't worry, Maya. We're going to make sure he doesn't get away with any of it. With Samantha's guidance, Maya systematically began freezing Reed's accounts and cutting off his access to the funds he had stashed away. She also gathered evidence of his emotional infidelity, documenting phone records and hidden email exchanges between him and his mistress. Finally, the day came when Maya was ready to confront Reed face to face. She arranged a meeting at a neutral location, under the pretense of discussing a settlement. But when Reed showed up, cocky and arrogant as ever, he was in for a rude awakening. What's this about, Maya? He sneered, taking a seat across from her. I thought we were going to keep things civil. Maya fixed him with a steely gaze, her hands clenched into fists under the table. Civil? She echoed, her voice dripping with contempt. You want to talk about civil after you've been lying and cheating on me for God knows how long? Reed's smug expression faltered as Maya began laying out the evidence. The bank statements, the emails, the phone records. With each damning piece of proof, his face grew paler and paler until he was visibly sweating. How? How did you find all of this? He stammered, his bravado evaporating. Maya leaned back in her chair, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. I have my ways, she said simply. And this is just the beginning, Reed. You and your little whore are going to pay for what you've done to me and our family. As she watched her soon-to-be ex-husband squirm, Maya knew that she was just getting started. The real battle was yet to come, but for the first time since Reed had dropped his bombshell, she felt a sense of empowerment. She was no longer the victim. She was the hunter, and Reed and his mistress were the prey. With Samantha's help, Maya wasted no time in striking back at Reed and his mistress, Jill. The first step was to freeze all of Reed's hidden accounts and cut off his access to the funds he had squirreled away. We need to move quickly, Samantha advised, her eyes gleaming with determination. Once Reed realizes what's happening, he'll try to move the money around and hide it elsewhere. Maya nodded, her jaw set in a grim line. Do whatever it takes. I want him to feel the same panic and betrayal that I felt when he dropped that bombshell on me. Over the next few days, Maya watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as Samantha systematically dismantled Reed's financial web. One by one, his secret accounts were frozen, his credit cards canceled, and his access to funds cut off. When Reed finally realized what was happening, he came storming into Samantha's office, his face flushed with rage. What the hell is going on? He demanded, slamming his fist on the desk. Why can't I access my accounts? Samantha leaned back in her chair, her eyes cool and appraising. I think you know exactly why, Mr. Westwood, she said calmly. Your little financial shenanigans have been exposed, and we're taking steps to ensure you don't try to hide any more assets. Reed's eyes darted to Maya, who was sitting in the corner, watching the confrontation unfold. You, he spat, his voice dripping with venom. You did this, didn't you? Maya met his gaze levelly, her expression betraying no emotion. You brought this on yourself, Reed, she said quietly. You thought you could just discard me like yesterday's trash and ride off into the sunset with your little trollop. Well, think again. Reed's face contorted with rage, and for a moment Maya thought he might strike her. But then Samantha cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I'd be very careful about how you proceed, Mr. Westwood, she said, her tone laced with subtle menace. We have all the evidence we need to ensure you get the divorce settlement you deserve, which is to say next to nothing. Reed's shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. You can't do this, he muttered, his voice tinged with desperation. That money was mine. I earned it. Samantha shook her head, a predatory smile playing on her lips. Not according to the law, she said. And by the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you can afford a cardboard box to live in. As Reed sat there, his head in his hands, Maya felt a surge of satisfaction. For years, she had been the dutiful wife, putting her own dreams and ambitions on hold to support Reed's career and raise their son. And this was how he had repaid her, by betraying her in the most callous and cruel way possible. But now, the tables had turned. Maya was the one holding all the cards, and Reed was the one who was about to lose everything. As she watched him sitting there, defeated and broken, she couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. This was just the beginning, she knew. There was still a long road ahead, with more battles to be fought and more emotional turmoil to endure. But for the first time since Reed's bombshell revelation, Maya felt a sense of hope. She was no longer the victim. She was the architect of her own revenge, and she was going to make damn sure that Reed and his mistress paid for what they had done. As she left Samantha's office, Maya held her head high, her stride confident and purposeful. She was a woman reborn, and she was just getting started. As Maya began to piece together her plan for revenge against Reed and his mistress Jill, she found an unexpected ally in her own son, Ethan. It had been a few days since the confrontation at Samantha's office, and Maya was sitting at home, poring over the mountain of evidence they had gathered against Reed. That's when Ethan walked in, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked tentatively. "I've been hearing some rumors around town about you and Dad." Maya sighed, running a hand through her hair. She hadn't wanted to burden Ethan with the messy details of her failing marriage, but she knew she couldn't keep him in the dark forever. "Your father has been unfaithful," she said bluntly. He's been carrying on an affair with another woman for God knows how long, and now he wants to leave me for her. Ethan's eyes widened in shock and then narrowed in anger. That bastard, he spat. How could he do that to you after everything you've sacrificed for this family? Maya shook her head warily. I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm not going to let him get away with it. Samantha and I are building a case against him, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he's done. To her surprise, Ethan's expression hardened with determination. Then I want to help, he said firmly. Dad's not the only one with skills around here. Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Ethan had always been a whiz with computers and technology, and she couldn't help but wonder what he had in mind. Over the next few days, Ethan became her trusted ally in the fight against Reed and Jill. Using his hacking skills and intimate knowledge of the dark web, he was able to uncover a wealth of information about Jill, her background, her financial history, and even some unsavory details about her past relationships. Looks like our dear Jill has a bit of a track record, Ethan said grimly, sliding a sheaf of printouts across the table to Maya. She's been involved with at least 2 other married men before Dad, and she's got a knack for making sure she gets a nice little payout when things go south. Maya's eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents. The little gold digger, she muttered. So that's her game. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. Exactly. And it looks like she's been working Dad over for months, maybe even years, slowly convincing him to squirrel away money and assets for their little love nest. Maya felt a surge of white-hot anger coursing through her veins. Not only had Reed betrayed her in the most callous way possible, but he had been planning this whole sordid affair with Jill for God knows how long, right under her nose. We're going to take them down, she said, her voice low and trembling with fury. Both of them. They're going to wish they never crossed paths with the Westwood family. Ethan reached across the table and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Don't worry, Mom, he said, his eyes glinting with determination. We've got this. Dad and his little side piece don't stand a chance against us. As Maya looked at her son, she felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Despite the betrayal and heartbreak she was facing, she wasn't alone in this fight. Ethan was her rock, her partner in crime, and together they were going to make sure that Reed and Jill paid for every ounce of pain and humiliation they had caused. With a newfound sense of purpose, Maya turned her attention back to the evidence laid out before her. It was time to start putting their plan into action. With Ethan's help, Maya had uncovered a wealth of damning information about Jill and her history of preying on wealthy married men. Armed with this knowledge, she knew it was time to take the next step in her plan for revenge. We need to bring Reed and Jill down in a big way, Maya said grimly, spreading out the evidence they had gathered on the kitchen table. A way that will humiliate them and make them realize the full extent of what they've done. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. I'm with you, Mom. Just say the word, and we'll make it happen. After some thought, Maya came up with the perfect plan. She would arrange a meeting with Reed and Jill under the guise of discussing a potential settlement for the divorce. But instead of a civilized negotiation, it would be a full-on confrontation, with all of their dirty laundry laid bare for the world to see. I want them to feel the same shame and humiliation that they've inflicted on me, Maya said, her eyes flashing with determination. I want to strip away all of their lies and deceptions and expose them for the snakes that they truly are. Ethan grinned, a wolfish glint in his eye. Consider it done, Mom. Over the next few days, Maya and Ethan worked tirelessly to set the stage for their grand reveal. They rented out a private room at an upscale restaurant and quietly extended invitations to a select group of Reed and Jill's friends and colleagues, people whose opinions and respect meant everything to the vain, status-conscious couple. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Maya took a deep breath as she smoothed her hands over her sleek, tailored dress, steeling herself for the confrontation to come. You ready for this, Mom? Ethan asked, giving her arm a reassuring squeeze. Maya nodded, her jaw set with determination. More than ready, she replied. It's time for these two to face the music. When Reed and Jill arrived, they were all smiles and false pleasantries, completely oblivious to the trap that had been laid for them. As they made their way to the private room, Maya couldn't help but notice the smug, self-satisfied looks on their faces, as if they had already won, as if they thought they could simply waltz away from the wreckage of their betrayal without consequence. But as soon as they stepped through the door and saw the gathered crowd of their friends and colleagues, their expressions shifted to ones of confusion and unease. "What's going on here?" Reed demanded, his voice wavering slightly. Maya stepped forward, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "What's going on, dear husband, is that your little secret is out," she said, her voice ringing out clearly in the hushed room. "Everyone here knows about your sordid affair with this woman and the lies and deceit you've been peddling for God knows how long." Jill's face went pale, and she clutched at Reed's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his flesh. "Reed, what is she talking about?" she hissed, her voice tinged with panic. But Reed could only stare at Maya, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish as the full weight of her revelation sank in. With a grim sense of satisfaction, Maya began to lay out the evidence they had gathered, the financial records, the emails, the sordid details of Jill's history as a gold digger and home wrecker. With each damning piece of proof, the murmurs and gasps from the assembled crowd grew louder, until the room was a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. As Maya reached the climax of her exposé, she fixed Reed and Jill with a look of pure undisguised contempt. "You two thought you could betray me, betray our family, and just walk away without consequence," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Well, you were wrong, dead wrong." In that moment, as she looked at the ashen-stricken faces of her soon-to-be ex-husband and his mistress, Maya felt a surge of triumph and vindication. They had been laid bare, their carefully constructed facade of lies and deceit torn away, leaving them exposed and vulnerable before the very people whose respect and admiration they craved. As the crowd erupted in a chorus of condemnation and scathing whispers, Reed and Jill could only cling to each other, their eyes wide with shock and humiliation. In that moment, Maya knew that she had won, not just the legal battle, but the war for her dignity and self-respect. She was no longer the wronged wife, the silent victim of her husband's betrayal. She was the avenging angel, the one who had struck back with righteous fury and emerged victorious. And as she stood there, basking in the sweet taste of her hard-won revenge, Maya knew that this was just the beginning. The aftermath of the grand reveal at the restaurant was even more satisfying than Maya could have imagined. As the shocked murmurs and whispers of condemnation swirled around them, Reed and Jill could only stand there, paralyzed with humiliation and shame. "How could you do this to me?" Jill hissed at Reed, her perfectly coiffed facade crumbling as tears of rage streamed down her face. "You said nobody would find out." Reed opened and closed his mouth like a gasping fish, but no words came out. His usual arrogant bravado was nowhere to be found, replaced by a look of utter defeat and despair. Maya couldn't help but relish the sight of the two of them, so thoroughly exposed and brought low. After months of planning and strategizing, her revenge was finally complete, and oh, how sweet it tasted. But she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. "You two haven't seen anything yet," she said, her voice ringing out loud and clear above the clamor. "This is just the beginning." Jill's head whipped around, her eyes narrowing with rage. "What are you talking about, you crazy bitch?" she spat, her carefully cultivated veneer of innocence cracking even further. Maya simply smiled, a cold, predatory smile that sent a shiver down Jill's spine. "Oh, you'll see," she said ominously. "You'll both see." Over the next few weeks, Maya made good on her promise. With the help of Samantha and Ethan, she unleashed a relentless legal and public relations assault on Reed and Jill, determined to strip them of every last shred of dignity and financial security. In the courtroom, Samantha was a force of nature, decimating Reed's feeble attempts at defense with a barrage of evidence and legal maneuvering. Time and again, the judge ruled in Maya's favor, awarding her a sizable portion of Reed's assets and ordering him to pay punitive damages for emotional distress and financial betrayal. "You brought this on yourself, Mr. Westwood," the judge said sternly, as Reed sat there, his head in his hands. "Your actions were reprehensible, and you will pay the price." But the real coup de grace came outside the courtroom, where Ethan and Maya waged a scorched earth campaign to destroy Jill's reputation and social standing. Using the information they had uncovered about her sordid past, they leaked damning details to the press and circulated them on social media, painting her as a manipulative gold digger who preyed on wealthy men for her own personal gain. Within weeks, Jill's carefully cultivated image was in tatters. She was shunned by her former friends and social circles, her name mud in the eyes of the very people whose approval she craved so desperately. "How could you do this to me?" she sobbed to Maya one day, cornering her in the courthouse parking lot. "I was just trying to find happiness, like anyone else." Maya fixed her with a withering glare, her contempt for the other woman radiating off her in waves. "Happiness?" she scoffed. "Is that what you call destroying families and ruining lives? You got exactly what you deserved, Jill. And if you know what's good for you, you'll slink back into whatever hole you crawled out of and disappear for good." As Jill dissolved into a fresh bout of tears, Maya turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high. She had won, not just the legal battle, but the war for her dignity and self-respect. Reed and Jill had been utterly decimated, their lives and reputations in ruins. And as she looked towards the future, Maya felt a sense of hope and possibility that she hadn't felt in years. She was free from the shackles of her failed marriage, free from the weight of Reed's betrayal, and free to start anew. With Ethan by her side and a sizable settlement in her pocket, the world was her oyster. And as she made plans to invest in a new business venture, something she had always dreamed of doing, but never had the courage or means to pursue. Maya knew that this was just the beginning of her new life. The road ahead would be full of challenges, no doubt, but she was ready to face them head-on, stronger and more resilient than ever before. She had stared down the abyss of heartbreak and betrayal, and she had emerged victorious, her spirit unbroken and her thirst for justice quenched. As she walked into the bright, promising future that lay ahead, Maya couldn't help but smile. She was a new woman, forged in the fires of her own hard-won revenge, and nothing and no one would ever break her again. As the legal battles raged on in the courtroom, Maya found herself engaged in a ferocious tug-of-war with Reed and his lawyers. They had clearly underestimated her resolve and the strength of the case that Samantha had built against him. Time and again, Reed's team would try to poke holes in the evidence, or argue that Maya's actions had been overly vindictive and damaging to his reputation. But Samantha was having none of it, countering their every move with a ruthless precision that left them floundering. "Your client's behavior was reprehensible, counselor," Samantha said coolly during one particularly heated exchange. "He betrayed his wife's trust in the most callous and calculated way possible. If his reputation has suffered, it's entirely his own doing." Reed shot Maya a venomous glare from across the courtroom, his face flushed with impotent rage. But Maya simply met his gaze head-on, her expression one of steely determination. She wasn't about to back down, not after everything she had been through. As the weeks dragged on, the legal maneuvering intensified, with both sides digging in their heels and refusing to give an inch. But slowly, inexorably, the weight of the evidence began to shift in Maya's favor. One by one, the judge's rulings chipped away at Reed's defenses, awarding Maya a larger share of the marital assets and ordering Reed to pay hefty damages for his emotional and financial betrayal. "This court finds that Mr. Westwood's actions were not only egregious but premeditated," the judge said sternly, his gavel punctuating each word like a hammer blow. "He systematically concealed assets and lied to his wife, all in service of his own selfish desires. Such behavior cannot and will not be tolerated." As the judge continued to read out the details of the settlement, Maya felt a surge of vindication coursing through her veins. This was it. The moment she had been fighting for, the moment when Reed's arrogance and deceit would finally catch up to him in a way he could never have imagined. When the final tally was read out, the look on Reed's face was one of utter disbelief and despair. Not only had he lost a significant portion of his assets and savings, but he had also been ordered to pay Maya a staggering sum in damages, a figure that would effectively cripple him financially for years to come. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his head in his hands as his lawyers attempted to console him. "How could she do this to me?" Maya couldn't help but let out a derisive snort at his words. How could he still be playing the victim after everything he had put her through? The sheer audacity of the man was staggering. As she left the courthouse that day, basking in the glow of her hard-won victory, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere revenge. She had faced down her betrayer, her tormentor, and she had emerged victorious. Not just legally, but morally and emotionally as well. Reed's arrogance and conceit had been his downfall, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life and reputation. And as for Jill, the woman who had so callously helped him destroy their marriage, well, she had already paid a heavy price. Her name and social standing in tatters, thanks to Maya and Ethan's relentless campaign of exposure. As Maya looked towards the future, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and possibility. With her legal battles finally behind her and a sizable settlement in hand, she was free to pursue her dreams and start anew, unburdened by the weight of her past. And this time, she vowed, no one would ever hold her back or underestimate her again. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had stared down the abyss of betrayal and emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. As she climbed into her car and pulled away from the courthouse, leaving the ghosts of her failed marriage behind, Maya couldn't help but smile. The road ahead was wide open, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead her next. With the legal battles finally behind her, Maya felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The long, arduous road to justice and revenge had taken its toll, but in the end she had emerged victorious, her spirit unbroken, her dignity intact. As she sat down with Ethan to discuss their plans for the future, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement bubbling up within her. For the first time in years, she was truly free. Free from the shackles of her failed marriage, free from the weight of Reed's betrayal, and free to pursue her dreams without fear or constraint. "So, what's next, Mom?" Ethan asked, a hopeful glint in his eye. "You've got a pretty hefty settlement to work with. Any ideas on how you want to spend it?" Maya paused for a moment, considering her options. In truth, she had been toying with an idea for years, a dream that she had always pushed aside in service of her family and her marriage. But now, with the world at her feet and a sizable nest egg at her disposal, she felt like the time was finally right. "You know how I've always talked about opening my own little cafe or bakery?" she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Well, I think I'm finally going to do it." Ethan's face lit up with a broad grin. "That's amazing, Mom," he exclaimed. "I always knew you had it in you, and hey, with my tech skills and your baking talents, we could make one hell of a team." Maya couldn't help but chuckle at her son's enthusiasm. Throughout the long, grueling ordeal with Reed and Jill, Ethan had been her rock, her unwavering support system and partner in crime. And now, as they embarked on this new chapter of their lives, it felt only natural that they should do it together. "You're absolutely right," she said, reaching across the table to give his hand a squeeze. "We make a great team, and with your help, I know we can make this little dream of mine a reality." Over the next few weeks, Maya and Ethan threw themselves into the planning and preparation for their new venture. They scouted locations, pored over business plans, and even took a few cooking classes together to brush up on their skills. It was a whirlwind of activity, but Maya thrived on the energy and excitement of it all. After years of living in the shadow of Reed's betrayal, she felt alive again, like she was finally taking control of her own destiny and forging a path that was truly her own. And as the pieces began to fall into place, with a prime location secured and the necessary permits and licenses obtained, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment that went far beyond the mere act of opening a business. This was her victory lap, her chance to rise from the ashes of her past and emerge as a stronger, more resilient version of herself. She had faced down her demons, her tormentors, and she had come out on top, not just legally and financially, but emotionally and spiritually as well. As the grand opening day drew near, Maya found herself filled with a nervous excitement that was tempered by a quiet confidence. She knew, deep down, that she was ready for this, ready to take on the world and prove that she was more than just a wronged wife or a victim of circumstance. And when the doors finally opened and the first customers began to trickle in, Drawn by the tantalizing aroma of fresh-baked pastries and the warm, inviting atmosphere, Maya felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. This was her baby, her creation, a tangible manifestation of her hard-won victory over adversity and betrayal. And as she looked around at the smiling faces of her customers, she couldn't help but feel like she had finally found her true calling. As the day drew to a close and the last customer had been served, Maya and Ethan stood side by side, surveying the fruits of their labor with a sense of quiet satisfaction. "We did it, Mom," Ethan said, giving her a gentle nudge with his elbow. "We really did it." Maya nodded, a contented smile playing across her lips. "Yes, we did," she replied. "And this is just the beginning." As she looked towards the bright, promising future that lay ahead, Maya knew that she had finally found her path. A path forged not by the expectations of others, but by her own strength, determination, and unwavering spirit. And as she prepared to embark on this new chapter of her life, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude, not just for the hard-won lessons and triumphs of her past, but for the simple joy and freedom that came with finally being true to herself. It had been a long, winding road, but in the end, Maya had emerged victorious. Not just over her betrayers, but over the doubts and insecurities that had once threatened to consume her. And as she looked ahead to the endless possibilities that awaited her, she knew that nothing and no one would ever hold her back again.